Chapter 420. You don't mind? Heh, I didn't promise to. Julian grinned, and the temperature dropped a little. Frost began to appear on the ground, as if it had entered a harsh winter. Julian, today's matter is just a misunderstanding. I respect you for being acquainted with my brother back then, and for being an old acquaintance of the Frost Dragon race, so I hope you can let bygones be bygones. Today, I am representing the dragon race to participate in the negotiation between the dragon race and the demon race. I hope you can understand this matter. Fox's expression was still calm, but his hands under his wide sleeves were trembling a little. His eyes were full of vigilance, and his back was slightly arched as if he was ready to attack at any time. Dracula and the others instinctively took a couple of steps back, and were also looking at Urian warily. They knew more about the legends of this Lord of Ice, and knew that those so-called legends weren't just baseless rumors. He had once slaughtered the man-eating demons alone, and hunted them down all over the continent until they were exterminated. Until now, no man-eating demons had appeared there. The strength of the man-eating demons back then was very close to the strength of the top 10 demon races. Because of one person, the entire race was exterminated. One could imagine how powerful he was. Of course, there was also a saying that the Crassus had participated in that massacre. It was just that the man-eating demons were all dead, and Julian had never mentioned this in front of others, so no one knew the truth. However, one thing was for sure. These two were not kind old grandpas. When it came to killing, they were more ruthless than anyone else. As for Fox, even the Frost Dragon King Rankster had to admit that Julian's ice magic was above his. If it were Fox, he would not even have the ability to fight back. However, Fox was indeed representing the dragon race to participate in the negotiation with the demons today. But would Julian care about his identity? Everyone thought to themselves as they looked at Julian. Julian, who used to be carefree, now had a disciple, which meant that he had concerns and weaknesses. Angering the dragon race was not a wise choice. What's wrong with the dragon race? Are they going to find a bunch of old men to fight me because of you? Julian looked at Fox with a mocking smile. Then, he raised his hand and slapped him to the ground. He then patted his face with the back of his hand, and continued, Rankster was much more obedient than you when he saw me back then because that guy was afraid of pain. I hit him once, and he remembered it. He knew to hide when he saw me, and when he couldn't hide, he knew to admit defeat. Why is your skin even thicker than his? Fox's body was stiff as he lay on the ground. He was in a daze. The moment Julian raised his hand, countless countermeasures flashed through his mind. But before he could execute them, his whole body seemed to be frozen. He couldn't move at all. This was a barrier that was more advanced and solid than his frost domain. In this space, he felt like a completely defenseless baby that could only be slaughtered. Master Julian is so awesome. Amy clapped her little hands together as she exclaimed. That ice crystal dragon was so powerful, but Julian's subordinate had been defeated in an instant, and he didn't even have a chance to retaliate. Her master was far too powerful. What powerful magic control! What is beyond the 10th tier? This is definitely not the power that a 10th tier magic caster should possess. Fox is close to the 10th tier as well. Havid took a couple of steps backward, and the flames that had been snuffed out began to reignite once again. Even my spatial magic can't break free from a magic barrier like this. No wonder those old monsters warned me not to mess with Julian and Crassus. Those two old monsters are far more powerful than normal great magic casters. No wonder none of the ogre tribe survived. Gustav was also looking at Julian with a wary expression, and he reflexively took a few more steps back in an attempt to distance himself from him. As expected, I have to be a gentleman, especially when it comes to adorable girls. Dracula put away his black cane as he nodded to himself. In this world, power is the key to living a more comfortable life. The foundation of freedom comes from great power, and that can be a powerful tool to set more people free. Meg looked at Julian's departing figure as he thought to himself. There were many things that he wanted to do, and that wasn't just running a restaurant. Great power would be a great help to him. Fox's heart was already filled with rage after being slapped to the ground and slapped in the face. However, he was being completely suppressed, and it was impossible for him to even move a finger. At the same time, he was also feeling a little fearful and furious as he glared at Julian with wide eyes. I, Julian, only have one disciple in my entire life. If anyone dares to bully her, then they will be bullying me. All of the people who have bullied me in my life are dead. Julian spoke slowly as if he was talking about something very ordinary. His voice was so hoarse that it sounded like a demon that had just crawled out of hell. There wasn't the slightest bit of emotion in his voice. An ice blade slowly condensed in Julian's hand. The crystal-clear ice blade was as thin as a cicada's wing. This was his extremely famous ice blade of death. Julian would only use this blade to cut off the heads of his enemies. In the past 100 years, less than 10 people had died under this blade. It wasn't because Julian hadn't killed many people, but because ordinary people didn't have the right to make him use this blade. He didn't expect to meet Fox today. It seemed like Julian really wanted to kill someone. Meg looked at the ice blade in Julian's hand and didn't say anything to stop him. If he was the one holding the blade now, he wouldn't hesitate to stab it into Fox's throat because this guy had just tried to kill him and his daughter. Meg knew this very well. What's this? However, a hint of concern appeared in Sally's eyes as she knew that if Urian were to kill Fox here, it would be a massive slap to the face to the entire dragon race. There was no way that the dragon race would let this matter rest. No matter how powerful Julian was, the Crassus would definitely step in to protect Amy. In the face of the dragon race, which had the most powerful beings, no one could challenge their most important dignity on their own. Julian. Master, this is just a misunderstanding. I actually only wanted to scare her. I didn't want to kill her at all. I'm not stupid. How could I kill someone in Chaos City? Fox was a little stunned by the slap, but he wasn't stupid. He looked at the ice blade of death, and could already sense the strong killing intent emanating from it. He thought back to all the things he had heard about Julian in the past, and his voice trembled slightly. Do you think I look stupid? Julian furrowed his brows, and then slashed down with the ice blade in his hand. Spare the dragon. Chapter 421. An arrow flew through the air, piercing through the ice barrier and striking the ice blade of death with unerring accuracy. The ice blade and the arrow shattered almost at the same time, and shards of wood and ice fell to the ground. Fox's heart was already in his throat, and he yelled in a panicked voice, "City Lord! Save me! Michael!" Julian looked up at the black horse-drawn carriage approaching from afar. There was a tall and broad figure standing on the shaft of the horse-drawn carriage. It was none other than the City Lord of Chaos City, Michael. He put down the black longbow in his hand, and said to Julian, "Julian, I don't know what happened, but I hope you can calm down first. Don't kill anyone in Chaos City, especially someone sent by the dragon race to attend the conference." Fox heaved a sigh of relief. In Chaos City, Michael's words were more important than anyone else's. Is he the City Lord? Isn't he the friend of the owner who came to the restaurant a few nights ago? Yarbemia looked at Meg with a shocked expression. She didn't think that Meg would be friends with the City Lord. That was something that she didn't even dare to imagine. Michael, do you think you can stop me if I want to kill someone? Julian asked with a smile as he looked at Michael. Apart from Novan, no one can stop you within 3 meters of you. Michael shook his head and gestured for the horse-drawn carriage to stop. No, even Novan won't be able to stop you within 3 meters. Julian looked at Michael with a confident smile and said, "This is my absolute domain. I can kill anyone I want. No one can be faster than me." Fox, who had just heaved a sigh of relief, became flustered again. A chill ran down his spine. If even City Lord Michael couldn't save him, then wouldn't his life be in the hands of Julian? That feeling struck him with fear, and he suddenly regretted attacking a little girl. If he had held back a little, then things wouldn't have turned out this way. Michael stared at Julian for a long while before sighing. Novan might not make it in time, but if Alex is still alive, he might be faster than you. He's already dead, isn't he? Julian's expression darkened. He sighed and said, "What a pity." "Yes, it's a pity." Michael nodded with a regretful expression. Upon hearing Alex's name, complex expressions appeared on the faces of the dragons and demons. Actually, he's dead, but he's still alive. Meg looked at the regretful faces of the two and felt as if something was stuck in his throat. He had to spit it out, but he could only hold it in. However, hearing the two of them elevate Meg times Alex's status so high, he felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. So Meg times Alex was so powerful when he was at his peak. He could actually be faster than Julian when he was in his absolute domain. So, whether I kill him or not, it's still up to me, right? Julian restrained his expression and looked at Michael with a hoarse voice. Yes. Michael nodded. He glanced at the pale-faced fox lying on the ground, and then looked at Julian. He shook his head and said, "But I know you won't kill him, at least not today." "Why?" Julian looked at Michael with interest. "If you want to kill him, my arrow just now can penetrate your domain, but it won't stop you from killing him." Michael smiled and glanced at Amy, who was standing at the side. He continued, "Besides, it's not a good thing to kill someone in front of a child, is it? No, since we're living in this world, killing people is something we have to do sooner or later. So, I'm not worried about what my disciple will do when she sees me kill someone, because she may be better at it than me in the future. Her character of abhorrence of evil has already determined her future path. I believe she'll do better than me." Julian shook his head. He clenched his fist, and a sharp icicle more than a meter long appeared in his hand. Then, he suddenly stabbed it toward Fox's eyes. "No!" Fox screamed. He looked at the rapidly falling icicle and closed his eyes. Michael narrowed his eyes slightly, but did not make another move. Meg reached out and covered Amy's eyes. Julian didn't care, but he did. Even if Amy would punish evil in the future, that was a matter for the future. She was still a child, and shouldn't be affected by these things. The icicle fell, but it didn't fall on Fox's eyes. Instead, it fell on his right hand. The sharp icicle pierced through his palm and nailed his hand to the ground. "Ah!" Fox screamed in agony. His whole body was trembling. Julian withdrew his hand from the icicle and looked into Fox's eyes. He said seriously, "I didn't kill you not because I don't dare to. If I want to kill you, no one can stop me. If you have any malicious intent toward Amy in the future, the frost dragon will be gone." "Yes. Yes." The pale-faced fox nodded. He couldn't hide the panic on his face. In that instant, he felt the shadow of death looming over him. The icicle that was aimed at his eyes seemed to have changed its mind at the last moment, and pierced his hand instead. Otherwise, he would already be dead. As such, he knew that Julian was serious. Furthermore, he wasn't saying that he would be gone. Instead, he was saying that the frost dragon would be gone. Julian had always been very good at eradicating species. At the very least, there was no one on the Norland continent who was better at eradicating species than him. Even though the frost dragon tribe was very powerful, it was definitely not a good thing to anger a great magic caster who was well past his prime. Furthermore, he was a renowned lunatic. A deep sense of horror welled up in Fox's heart. He didn't think that the entire frost dragon tribe would be threatened because of a little half-elf girl. "This restaurant is very dangerous. We can't afford to mess with it." All of the demons and giant dragons also took meaningful glances at Meg and his daughter. Even though they also had top-tier 10th-tier beings in their tribe, if Julian were to drag the Crassus down with him, then the tragedy of the ogres could happen again. They didn't have to worry about anyone else, but they had to warn their juniors not to mess with half-elves in the future. "Master Julian is so powerful." Yarbemia stared at Julian with astonishment in her eyes. Even a powerful giant dragon like her was completely powerless in the face of this man. Master Julian is known as the #1 magic caster who shouldn't be messed with. He's still as intimidating as ever. With his words, there shouldn't be too many people coming to the restaurant to cause trouble. Chapter 422. Okay, Amy will remember this. When Amy grows up, I'll defeat this bad guy myself. Amy nodded seriously at Julian. Was it arrogance? No, it was confidence. Both master and disciple were equally confident. All of the demons and giant dragons looked at Amy, and an indescribable feeling welled up in their hearts. This little half-elf girl who appeared to be only 3 or 4 years old was most likely going to become a dazzling new star in the near future. Someone who could be chosen as a disciple by both Julian and Crassus, and a genius who could make them compromise with each other, could definitely not be mediocre. Fox gritted his teeth and endured the pain. He did not dare to look at Amy and Julian, for fear that he would lose control of his emotions. Many years ago, when he first met Julian, his powerful ice magic had left a shadow in his heart. As his strength continued to increase, he thought that the gap between them was not that big. It was only when he was slapped to the ground that he came to his senses. "You're still my lord." Julian's title of number 1 ice magic was not self-proclaimed, but publicly acknowledged. Julian and Crassus will die, and when that time comes, this little guy will definitely not be able to grow to the point where he can threaten me. Fox lowered his head, and a hint of viciousness flashed across his eyes. "When that time comes, I'll make sure that father and daughter die a horrible death. Julian, do you want to come to this meeting?" Michael handed the longbow in his hand to the coachman beside him, and jumped down from the carriage. He looked at Michael with a smile. "Do you think I'm a demon or a dragon?" Julian looked at Michael and asked him in return. "You're still as humorous as ever." "All right, I'll look for you to have a drink together next time," Michael said with a smile. "Since you're treating, I'll come," Julian said expressionlessly, and then turned to walk in the direction of the magic potion shop. The cold air that shrouded the restaurant's entrance disappeared in an instant, and the dragons and demons secretly heaved a sigh of relief. They had seen many 10th-tier powerhouses before, but this was the first time they had seen such a stifling atmosphere. "Mr. Mac, I'm sorry to have startled you. The City Lord's castle did not come over in advance, and caused this conflict," Michael said apologetically to Meg. "It's all right. I just hope that the City Lord will screen the customers before booking the restaurant next time." "We don't serve some customers," Meg said with a slight nod. He did not appear too angry, but he did not deliberately try to be nonchalant. After what happened in the slums this morning, the City Lord's castle would definitely need a lot of manpower. Michael was probably very busy, so he could understand why the City Lord's castle didn't send someone over earlier. "Something like this won't happen again." Michael nodded before turning to Fox, who had just gotten up from the ground and pulled out the icicle in his hand. His expression darkened slightly as he said, "Fox, you're here to negotiate as a representative of the dragon race, so I won't expel you. However, I'm warning you that you have to abide by Chaos City's rules. The safety of Chaos City's residents is paramount. If something like this happens again, the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple definitely won't let you off." Fox's expression darkened slightly, but he still lowered his head at the sight of Michael's stern expression. He suppressed his voice, and said, "I understand." Michael's expression eased slightly as he looked at Fox's bleeding hand, and said, "If your injuries are severe, you don't have to attend today's meeting. There's no need for that. I can attend this meeting." Fox shook his head. He gently stroked the wound on his right hand with his left hand, and the gaping wound on his right hand was immediately covered in ice. It was as if he had put on a pair of ice gloves, and the bleeding immediately stopped. However, everyone present knew that Fox's injuries were definitely not as simple as just a gaping wound on his hand. Otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen to use ice to temporarily stop the bleeding instead of relying on the powerful regenerative abilities of the dragon race to heal the wound. Michael glanced at Fox's hand before turning to Meg with a smile, and asked, "Mr. Mac, can we enter now?" "Please come in." Meg opened the restaurant's door with Amy's hand in his, and nodded with a smile. Even though he didn't have a good impression of Fox, as the owner of a restaurant, it clearly wasn't appropriate for him to cause trouble during the meeting. Meg still had a discerning eye. A few horse-drawn carriages with the City Lord's castle insignia arrived not far away, and a few officials carrying piles of documents quickly strode toward the restaurant's entrance. The restaurant isn't very big, but it's very exquisite. I'm curious as to why Michael would choose this place as the venue for the meeting. Dracula was the first to walk into the restaurant. "Welcome." Yarbemia smiled. After hearing Jinx's words, her mood had improved again. So there were still dragons who didn't look down on half-breeds. If only her father was a golden dragon as well. Sally nodded in response. Even though she didn't like bloodthirsty vampires, she still had a good impression of this well-mannered vampire who was about to step in to help Meg and Amy. Dracula's eyes lit up at the sight of the two of them, and he bowed with a smile. "Hello, beautiful ladies. I finally know why Lord Michael chose to hold the meeting here. Aside from the exquisite restaurant, the most important thing is that there are beautiful and elegant waitresses." After everyone entered the restaurant, Michael turned to Meg with gratitude, and said, "Mr. Mack, thank you for what you did this morning at the area where the families of the deceased miners lived. You saved many people who were living in misery, and also removed a piece of haze from this city. I just happened to see it. We still have to rely on the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple to remove the haze from the city, but I hope that you can give the people living in this haze a chance to breathe. Let them know that the haze isn't actually an impenetrable fortress. As long as they reach out, someone outside the haze will be able to grab their hand and pull them out," Meg said with a serious expression. "What do you think, Mr. Mack?" Michael turned to Meg with a serious expression. He was very surprised by the words that Brandley had told him about Meg. Meg wasn't just a chef who could say something like that. Chapter 423. Petition Organization. Michael looked at Meg and thought seriously for a while. His eyes became brighter and brighter, and he suddenly grasped Meg's hand and said excitedly, "Your idea is really wonderful. I've been thinking about how to supervise the officials today, but as long as it's a hierarchical management method, there are bound to be all kinds of loopholes and gray areas. And the best supervisors are actually the civilians at the lowest level. Yes, if the families of the deceased miners had a place to complain when the compensation was embezzled, then the tragedy wouldn't have happened." Meg nodded and calmly withdrew his hand. Although he didn't know much about politics, he was, after all, a person who had experienced modern society. Some political institutions were still very valuable if they could be used well. "Very good, but I have to discuss this matter with Roland first, and then come up with a plan." Michael nodded and looked at Meg, and sincerely said, "Mr. Mack, if it weren't for your delicious cooking, I really want to pull you into the City Lord's castle as my assistant. You're a very thoughtful and far-sighted person." "I still prefer cooking." Meg smiled and shook his head. "That's true. The City Lord's castle can't pay Mr. Mack such a high salary." Michael also smiled and walked into the restaurant. "Father, did Amy do something wrong?" Amy grabbed Meg's hand and looked up at Meg with a puzzled look in her big blue eyes. "Amy didn't do anything wrong. It's the world that's wrong." Meg smiled and stroked Amy's hair, then squatted down in front of her and looked at her as he said, "However, before you give a nickname to a stranger in the future, you have to see what kind of person they are first. If it's a gentlemanly and kind person, they'll treat it as a kind joke and a friendly nickname, but if it's a person who's easily angered and narrow-minded, they'll treat it as an insult and even use it as a reason to hurt you. Father believes that you do not view this world with malice, but sometimes, the world is evil." Amy thought for a while, then nodded seriously and said, "Yes, Amy understands. Just like how Big Sister 1111 and Big Bear are kind people, and the bad guy just now is a narrow-minded person. From now on, Amy won't give them nice names. Millimeter, good girl." Amy gave Amy a hug, then held her little hand as they walked into the restaurant. She smiled and said, "Let's go. There's going to be an important meeting at our restaurant tonight, so when they're talking, Amy can listen from the side, but don't disturb them." "Okay, Amy got it." Amy nodded obediently. In the restaurant, the dragons and demons had already sat opposite each other and looked at each other. The atmosphere gradually became solemn and oppressive. Michael sat down at the head of the table, and a worker from the City Lord's castle was handing out information. Two officials sat at the end of the table, holding pens and paper in their hands. It appeared that they were responsible for recording the meeting's content. There were exactly 10 people in total. Yarbemia poured a glass of water for everyone, then stood near the kitchen with Sally. Meg had already told them about the meeting, and Michael hadn't told them to avoid arousing suspicion anyway, so they could watch from the side when the food wasn't being served. They just had to make sure that they didn't disturb the meeting. As for when the food was going to be served, Michael didn't say anything. However, under normal circumstances, such a serious meeting wouldn't be held while eating, right? "Are they going to fight?" Amy lay down on the tall stool behind the counter with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and looked at everyone in the restaurant with curiosity in her eyes. Meg entered the kitchen and continued to prepare ingredients. Giant dragons and demons most likely all had huge appetites. After all, the entire restaurant had been booked, so he had to provide enough food. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to afford to pay 300,000 copper coins. This restaurant is quite interesting. The demon islands are pretty well drawn. It's almost like a map. Dracula withdrew his gaze from the wallpaper, and a relaxed expression appeared on his face. However, after his gaze fell on the three dragons, he curled his lips in disdain, and said, "How can you dragons be so shameless?" After the end of the racial war, the two races signed an agreement that the boundless sea realm belongs to the two races. Regardless of what is discovered in the boundless sea realm, first come first serve. This time, your dragon race suddenly attacked our demon race's fleet, leading to the destruction of an entire fleet, which triggered this small-scale war. You dragons have to give us an explanation for this matter. Bullshit. Jinx slammed the table as he glowered, and said, "You demons were the ones who started this. Even though our dragon race doesn't really care about the areas outside of Dragon Island, that doesn't mean you can approach Dragon Island as you please. Dragon Island is located in the boundless sea realm, and there are over 3,600 islands around it that are all part of our dragon race's territory. That so-called fishing team of yours actually ran to the westernmost island of our dragon race and said that this is your territory. Furthermore, you even seriously injured a blue dragon residing there. You are trying to invade the Dragon Island. You're challenging the dignity of our dragon race." Bullshit. I was there in person. That island is thousands of kilometers away from Dragon Island, so it doesn't belong to Dragon Island anymore. If any random island in the boundless sea realm is your territory, then why don't you say that the demon islands also belong to Dragon Island? Besides, that blue dragon was the one who started the battle, just like those idiots of your dragon race. They always think that they're going to be able to take down an entire ship of demons, only to be crushed into the ground in the end. If you can't beat them, then go back and call for reinforcements. Next time, wait until our reinforcements arrive. Toros slammed the table as he spoke, and his face was flushed with rage. The table tremored slightly, and two cracks appeared on the surface of the table. Isn't it just a battle? Do you think our dragon race is afraid of you? It's just that you're way too slow. We've already returned after the battle, and you've only just arrived to collect their corpses. If you don't want to admit defeat, then why don't we fight right now? Flames erupted from Havid's body, burning two massive holes into the table that he was sitting on, and the chair beneath him was also incinerated into a pile of ashes. The atmosphere instantly became very tense, and both sides glared at each other, seemingly ready to attack at any moment. The battle has only just begun, and it's already so intense. Are they going to destroy the restaurant? Meg was a little concerned as he looked on. However, the City Lord's castle had promised that all damaged items in the restaurant would be compensated accordingly, so anything that could be purchased from the system wasn't an issue as long as one had the money. Yarbemir also clenched his fists tightly as he looked on with a pained expression at the sight of the incinerated table. These customers had gone too far. How dare they destroy the table? Chapter 424. All of the demons and giant dragons looked at one another in bewilderment. They didn't think that the normally easygoing Michael would be so blunt today. It wasn't as if there had never been a conflict between the two sides of a conference before, and it was a unique feature of conferences on the Norland continent. However, not only had Michael forbidden them from doing so, he was even showing them the rules of this restaurant. Since when did a conference between the dragons and demons have to be conducted according to the rules of a single restaurant? Even though they were feeling very conflicted, they could tell from Michael's expression that he wasn't joking. Furthermore, they were here to negotiate as representatives of the dragons and demons, so if they were kicked out without any discussion, they wouldn't be able to answer to their superiors. Chaos City wasn't as powerful as the major races on the Norland continent, but it was a city that had been founded after the conclusion of the war among species, so it had a special status. Almost no races had ever clashed with Chaos City, so it was a neutral city on the Norland continent. It was exactly because of this that Chaos City was responsible for mediating conflicts between different races. During the past century, countless ceasefire agreements had been signed here, and it had become a common practice. Furthermore, Chaos City definitely wasn't a weak city. During the past century, many powerful beings from different races had gathered here, and they had all agreed that they were residents of Chaos City. They didn't belong to any race, and only fought for Chaos City. As the city lord, Michael was also extremely powerful. He had already become a 10th tier knight 30 years ago, and his arrow that had pierced through Julian's ice barrier was a testament to his power. He was one of the most powerful beings on the Norland continent, and his status was just as high as that of their chief. In Chaos City, his words represented authority. Let me see what other rules this restaurant has. Dracula was the first to pick up the menu, and began to read through it. After a while, he turned to Havid and Toros with a peculiar expression, and said, "Looks like you two have to pay for the tables and chairs in this restaurant before you can leave, and you have to pay in cash. As such, demons and giant dragons have to be gentlemanly. I really like the rules of this restaurant. They're teaching you how to be a gentleman, at least when it comes to eating." Everyone else hesitated momentarily upon hearing this before picking up the menus on the table as well. Havid looked at the spark on his hand, and hesitated momentarily before snuffing it out before picking up the menu. Fox put down the menu in his hand, and asked Michael, "City Lord Michael, we're here for a meeting, not a meal. If we're not even allowed to speak, how are we going to continue?" "Yeah, it's fine if we don't fight, but my voice is just that loud. Also, the chief told me that I have to speak loudly when I came back. It's one thing to talk too much, but I can't lose in terms of presence," Jinx said, scratching his head. Do we really have to pay in cash? But I don't have any cash on me. What am I supposed to do?" Havid scratched his head with furrowed brows. "That's right. The restaurant only accepts cash. We don't owe anyone anything." Amy nodded as she turned to Havid, and said, "Uncle Fireman, you can borrow some cash from Uncle Golden Silk over there. If he doesn't have any cash on him, you just have to pluck a few strands of his golden hair, and that should be enough." Havid turned to Jinx's hair upon hearing this, contemplating the feasibility of this idea. "Havid, you're not that poor, are you? Don't even think about taking my hair. If you really don't have enough money, I'll lend you some, and you'll pay me double the amount when we get back." Jinx took a step away from the eager Havid as he cautioned in a serious voice. "All right, I'll pay you back double when we get back." Havid nodded in tacit agreement. "MIA, get a new table and chair for the guests," Meg called out from the kitchen. He didn't think that Michael would be so straightforward and direct. If they didn't have to fight in the restaurant, then they wouldn't have to worry about the restaurant being torn down. After all, the restaurant was already receiving a lot of attention, and if it were to be torn down, it would be very difficult to restore it overnight even if they had the money and the system. Otherwise, it would attract a lot of attention. "All right." MIA nodded before bringing over a new table and chair for Havid. Meanwhile, Sally quickly swept away the ashes with a broom. She didn't use the water magic that she was most adept at. "Are you worried about being recognized?" Meg turned to Sally with a hint of surprise on his face, but he didn't ask any questions. "The conference can continue, that's why I'm here today. Chaos City has always maintained an impartial stance, and as a witness and moderator of the conference, we won't participate in the conference, nor will we offer any opinions on the content of the conference." Michael looked at everyone, who had fallen silent again, and spread open his hands as he said, "You can continue now." The giant dragon and demon factions looked at one another. There was no way that they were going to fight unless they wanted to forfeit this conference and risk being kicked out by Michael himself. Furthermore, they had indeed come here for the conference. Both sides had sustained heavy losses during the border war, and neither side had won. That small island was currently under the control of the demons, but due to the fact that it had been surrounded by giant dragons, the two sides were locked in a meaningless tug-of-war. Regardless of whether it was the giant dragons or the demons that were constantly being conscripted, this regional war was going to drag on for a very long time. Aside from expending both sides' combat prowess and wealth, there was no point in doing so. However, both sides were already at the height of their powers, and there were many demons and giant dragons involved in the war. Even though they were still restraining themselves from mobilizing their most powerful beings, If this continued, there was no guarantee that they would be able to keep the situation under control. Once 10th tier beings joined the battle, there was a very good chance that a true interracial war would erupt. The continent, which had just enjoyed a century of peace, was going to experience a baptism of war again. At a time like this, if both sides could retreat without having to embarrass themselves, that would undoubtedly be the best option. This was also why they had come here in the first place. However, negotiation wasn't a simple matter. How could they gain the most benefits from the negotiation table? How could they make their side stand on the moral high ground? Even if they wanted to make the other side take the blame for this conflict. That was all a matter of knowledge. As such, they had to first overwhelm the other side with their imposing manner. It appeared that fighting wasn't going to work at the moment. Otherwise, they would be disqualified, so they could only resort to verbal sparring. Chapter 425. Fox's expression immediately darkened. His frozen right hand was trembling slightly on the table, while his left hand was clenched tightly into a fist. Ha ha ha. Toros and Gustav both burst into raucous laughter, almost burrowing under the table. Jinx and Havid were both trying their best to repress their laughter. One of them was looking up at the chandelier, while the other was looking down at a small black dot on the table, and both of them were trembling uncontrollably. PFFFT. Ha ha ha. I can't hold it in any longer, Fox. I've always wanted to tell you something, but I didn't think your butt would be so white. Ha 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 ha. Havid couldn't help but burst into raucous laughter. Ha ha ha. You saw it too. I saw it too. Ha 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 ha. Jinx also burst into raucous laughter. He had been holding back his laughter for far too long, and tears were flowing from his eyes. Yarbemia slowly turned her head to the side and tried her best not to burst into laughter, but she couldn't help but smile at the thought of Fox being forced to run around naked. Alex. I didn't think that he would be such a person, but he's definitely not a good person. He must have only done that to punish him, right? I wonder if the princess was with him at the time. A hint of surprise and bewilderment flashed through Sally's eyes, as well as a hint of pity. Running around naked? Does that mean running around outside without any clothes on? This bastard is so shameless. REMI glanced at Fox with a look of disdain. Something like that happened. In the kitchen, Meg also faltered slightly upon hearing this. He had no recollection of this, and he didn't know who Fox was, so it appeared that Irina had been with him at the time. Fox took a deep breath to calm himself down, and then looked at Dracula with some mockery. Dracula, don't you vampires claim that you only drink blood and are absolutely not vegetarians? I heard that you were forced to eat grass for 3 days by Princess Irina, and even your hair was dyed green. The smile on Dracula's face stiffened instantly, as if he had recalled something unbearable. His expression gradually became twisted, and a sickly flush appeared on his pale face. Phut. Ha ha ha, I remember that. It was at the Demon Plaza, and they even sold tickets for 10 silver coins each. At the time, the line was so long that it stretched all the way to the outside of the plaza. I also bought a ticket, and that was the first time I saw a vampire eating grass so deliciously. Toros slapped his thigh and laughed so hard that he was almost out of breath. I saw it too. I even bought a return ticket and specially went home to bring my son to watch it. He was responsible for all the jokes I made that year. Gustav also had an excited expression. Fuck. Ah. Are you still teammates? Dracula looked at Toros and Gustav with a pained expression. If you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten about it. I even flew over to take a look. Vampires are eating grass. It's the first time I've seen something like that in my life. I didn't think that the happy vampire eating grass would be you. Genghis looked at Dracula with a shocked expression before chortling again. Yarbemia was also trying very hard not to burst into laughter. Irina. Meg was rather surprised to hear that. However, he couldn't help but burst into laughter when he imagined a vampire being forced to eat grass. That girl really was no ordinary person. Furthermore, she was selling tickets for something like this. Could it be that she was trying to raise money for travel expenses? She had run away from the elven race in the past, so she had to have some ability to earn money to travel across the Norland continent. She deserved full marks for coming up with this idea. Princess Irina. Sally's eyes lit up. She had run away from home just like Irina, and she didn't think that she would hear about her here. She thought to herself, the princess really is awesome. She really did go to the Demon Islands and made a 9th-tier vampire eat grass. But why is she charging fees? Could it be? Sally's eyes widened. Why was she still in Chaos City? Not only was she mesmerized by the food at Mammoth, but she also didn't have much money with her. After leaving the Wind Forest, she realized that it was impossible to do anything on the Norland continent without money. Elves were close to nature, but they couldn't be satisfied just by drinking dew. Furthermore, they had to spend money to stay in the city and buy clothes. The wage of 30 copper coins a day in the inn made her understand that it was not easy to make money. Princess Irina had caught a 9th-tier vampire, forced him to eat grass, and then sold a ticket for 10 silver coins. It was as if a door to a whole new world had been opened for her. So, money can be earned like this. She really is the most powerful Princess Irina. Sally praised Irina from the bottom of her heart. If she were in Irina's shoes, even if she could defeat that vampire, there was no way she would allow him to eat grass and collect money from the side. Uncle Bat, didn't you say you're not a vegetarian? Is that elven princess that nice? She actually fed you grass. Amy looked at Dracula excitedly. Then, like a little adult, she said, you have to be good. You can't be picky. You have to eat a little of everything. This is what Lord Father said. Dracula immediately turned around to look at Amy, and his eyes widened even more as the beautiful elf holding a black leather whip in her hand repeatedly repeated the same sentence over and over again in his mind. You have to be good, you can't be picky, you have to eat a little of everything. That's right, you have to eat a little of everything. That's right, you have to eat more. Even though it had been 5 years, hearing the exact same words again made Dracula have the urge to kneel down. His brain was trembling as he looked at Amy's delicate face, big blue eyes, and delicate pointy ears. In his eyes, the image of her slowly overlapped with that of the Demoness. Impossible. It's impossible for them to have children. Dracula shook his head vigorously to deny this thought. He didn't think that after so many years, he would hear the same words from a little girl again. Furthermore, there was such a worried expression on her face, and it was quite irresistible. You win. Dracula gritted his teeth as he glared at Fox. In this first round of clashes, both sides were evenly matched, and it could be said that both sides had suffered heavy losses. Don't laugh, Tauros. I heard that the porcupine battle pigs that you abyssal demons raised in the abyss went on a rampage because of Irina. You led a team to capture her, only to be chased by a herd of porcupine battle pigs for an entire night, right? Jinx chuckled. Jinx, you have the cheek to criticize me. Who was the one who bragged that he was the most powerful being in the world, only to lose to Alex in an arm wrestling match, and had to call him Lord Father 3 times? Tauros scoffed. Gustav, are you happy? I heard that someone wanted to peek at the elven princess bathing, and was trapped in space by the Tree of Life for an entire year. He was famished by the time he came out. Heh, you have the cheek to criticize me, Havid. Weren't you the one who Alex encountered on his first trip to Dragon Island? You were too hot, so he kicked you into the ocean, and you stayed at the bottom of the ocean for 3 days before daring to resurface. Chapter 426. This was supposed to be a peaceful meeting, but it turned into a gathering of scandals and scandals in the blink of an eye. It could be seen that both sides had made ample preparations prior to this meeting. They had even dug up the embarrassing incident of a 3-year-old wetting his bed, and it could be said that they were willing to do anything in order to break each other's resolve. The 2 officials from the City Lord's castle were doing their best to repress their laughter, and their faces were already flushed with embarrassment. They had recorded many meetings in the past, but never had they encountered a situation like this. The handwriting on the paper was already a little twisted, and they didn't know if they should record the contents of this meeting. If they did, they would be hunted down and killed. Even Michael wore a peculiar expression upon seeing this, but his excellent self-control prevented him from bursting into laughter as he continued to listen in silence. So adults were also so mischievous when they were little. That Uncle Alex and Auntie Irina are so impressive, they taught them a lesson. I wonder what they look like, and will I be able to see them in the future? If only little Amy could be as powerful as them in the future. Little Amy appraised everyone with a curious look on her little face. As for Yarbemia and Sally, they had already turned away and were unable to stop themselves from laughing. A group of 9th-tier giant dragons and demons were ripping each other apart. This was far too hilarious. As expected, this is an unusual negotiation, but it looks like Meg, Alex and Irina really were naughty back in the day. From the Demon Island to the Dragon Island, they left behind their glorious deeds everywhere, and this is most likely only the tip of the iceberg. Meg thought to himself. At the same time, he was feeling quite fortunate that his current appearance was completely different from that of Meg Alex. He had changed his appearance, and his disposition was completely different from his own, so he didn't have to worry about these people recognizing him. This exchange of insults lasted for over half an hour, and it slowly became a gathering of reminiscing about the past. Following which, a peculiar silence abruptly ensued. Tears were welling up in the eyes of both sides as they looked at each other. As expected, the ones who knew them the best were still their enemies. Don't you have any conscience for exposing my painful past? Tauros looked at the three of them with a pained expression. Being chased around by the porcupine battle boar back then was a trauma that he couldn't shake off for the rest of his life. Everything was caused by those two fellas. However, that arrogant fella is already dead, and that Demonis is also locked up. Fox clenched his teeth. It seemed like he still hadn't forgotten the incident where he was chased around Dragon Island naked. What a pity. This world is boring to begin with. It's rare to have two interesting people, but they were erased by this world. This world is really not a good thing. Dracula sighed and said with a look of regret. Everyone looked at Dracula in unison. Dracula, do you want to eat grass again? Gustav asked curiously. Who would want to eat grass? Us vampires definitely won't eat grass, Dracula replied in a serious manner. It's just a pity. I heard that Alex was killed by a sneak attack, and some of our demon race members were also involved. What a despicable act. If you can't fight like a gentleman, then don't provoke him. In my opinion, Alex is a good gentleman. Dracula sighed in a forlorn manner. He's a righteous person and powerful. Alex is indeed the most powerful human I've ever seen, and is also the knight that I admire the most. Jinx nodded in agreement with Dracula's words. A person like him is destined to die a horrible death. When a human takes pride in slaying dragons and tries to lead this trend, he's already dead, Fox said in a cold voice. What's so pitiful about the scum that died at his hands? They've tarnished the reputation of our dragon race, and they don't deserve to be a member of our dragon race. Havid pursed his lips with disdain. Even if what they did was wrong, that's still our dragon race's business. A puny human like him has no right to judge and punish them. What does he think of our dragon race? Fox gritted his teeth as he glowered at Havid. They chose to fight him, and he killed him fair and square, so what's there to say? As a dragon, you have to accept defeat. Fox, you're such a scumbag. Where's your honor as a dragon? Why haven't you ever discussed killing him on the Dragon Island? Don't you know that? Havid retorted with a disdainful look in his eyes. Havid, is your fire dragon tribe trying to declare war on our frost dragon tribe? Fox gritted his teeth as he glowered at Havid. Fox, what right do you have to declare war on our fire dragon tribe on behalf of the frost dragon tribe? Even if you want to fight, the fire dragon tribe has nothing to fear. Havid glared at Fox with no intention of backing down. The auras of the two of them continued to climb, and the atmosphere in the restaurant became a little tense, as if a battle were going to erupt at any moment. The three demons were completely dumbstruck. They didn't think that a battle would break out between the dragons before they even had a chance to do anything. The two of them who had stirred up the entire continent a few years ago were like taboos. Just the mention of them would be viewed as polar opposites, and conflicts could erupt at any moment. Excuse me, can we serve the dishes now? Right at this moment, a voice broke the tense atmosphere. Everyone turned toward the entrance of the kitchen in unison. Fox's expression immediately darkened, and he forced himself to refrain from lashing out. The other dragons and demons were also quite displeased that their discussion had been interrupted. Even though this human was the father of Crassus' disciple, he was still just a human chef with no power. Some of the ingredients have been prepared for a long time, and if we don't eat them now, they won't taste as good. Meg stood at the entrance of the kitchen with an apologetic expression. It wasn't that he didn't have a discerning eye. If he didn't eat the tofu pudding, ruggiamo, and other dishes that had been prepared for a long time, then they wouldn't be up to his standards. Seeing as the discussion has reached an impasse, let's eat something first. I hope you understand that you're here to discuss the border war between the dragons and demons, so it's best if you go back and resolve any internal issues. Michael looked at everyone before nodding at Meg, and said, Mr. Mac, please serve the dishes. All right. Meg nodded before entering the kitchen, followed by Yarbemia and Sally. As a vampire, I definitely won't eat food cooked by humans, nor will I be a vegetarian. My only pursuit is fresh blood. Dracula leaned back in his chair and crossed his legs. Hello, this is savory tofu pudding. Chapter 427. Savory tofu pudding? Dracula's eyes narrowed as he looked at the white porcelain bowl. There was something white and tender in the bowl, and there was a layer of orange-red sauce on top of it. There were also some chopped pickles and small shrimps scattered on top. An alluring fragrance wafted into his nose. He couldn't tell what it was, but it was different from blood and grass. However, it was so fragrant and alluring, as if it wanted to drill into his heart. He couldn't help but swallow his saliva. What kind of brain is this? What's tofu? A type of magical beast. Why haven't I heard of it before? But this smell is quite fragrant. Do you want to try it? Many questions flashed through Dracula's mind, and he fell into deep thought as he looked at the savory tofu pudding in front of him. Your sweet tofu pudding, your savory tofu pudding. Yarbemia continued to bring out the dishes, and one tofu pudding after another was placed in front of everyone. There were sweet and savory tofu puddings, and they were placed in front of different people. On this occasion, he didn't ask for their tastes. If he didn't ask for their tastes, would they not like it? Besides, this meeting is already very intense. If there's a conflict over the taste of the tofu pudding, wouldn't it worsen the situation even further? Sally was a little perplexed as she looked at Meg, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen with a smile on his face. She didn't understand why he was serving both sweet and savory tofu puddings at the same time. Michael looked at the savory tofu pudding in front of him, then at the different tofu puddings in front of everyone else, and he was also a little perplexed. He had heard about the conflict between Amy's sweet and savory tofu pudding from Robert, and it appeared that Meg was trying to stir up another conflict between the demons and giant dragons. Wouldn't that make the situation even more complicated? I love eating brains. Smashing open skulls and licking the brains that are stained with blood is an unparalleled pleasure. Gustav looked at the sweet tofu pudding in front of him with an excited expression, and he rubbed his hands together as he said, "This owner sure knows how to enjoy himself, but I've never had sweet brains before. Also, what kind of magical beast is this tofu pudding? Why haven't I heard of it before? Humans are actually the cruelest race on the Norland continent. I've never heard of anything that they can't eat, from the smallest insects on the ground to us dragons. As long as it can move, they'll eat it, even the soil. I would never eat something as indecent as a brain," Jinx said with disdain as he crossed his arms in front of his chest. "I've heard that humans are the most proficient cooking species on the Norland continent. I'm really curious about what this savory tofu pudding tastes like." Havid appraised the tofu pudding before him with an intrigued expression. "Hey, Toros, why is yours different from mine?" Dracula glanced at the sweet tofu pudding in front of Toros, then at the sweet tofu pudding in front of Gustav, only to find that they were both different from his. Slurp. Gustav had already scooped a spoonful of sweet tofu pudding into his mouth. Everyone's eyes fell on him in unison. Something cooked by humans can't be that good, right? I'd rather starve to death than eat anything here today. Dracula also crossed his arms in front of his chest as he looked at Gustav, who had his eyes closed. How could it be so delicious? Gustav swallowed the tofu pudding in his mouth before opening his eyes with incredulity in his eyes. He praised, "This brain is so smooth and soft, and it's sweet but not greasy at all. Even though it doesn't reek of blood, it's simply irresistible. It's definitely the best brain I've ever tasted. I've never tasted a brain as delicious as this. No magic beast's brain has ever tasted as delicious as this. It's simply too delicious. As soon as his voice trailed off, he lowered his head and continued to munch on the tofu pudding, completely ignoring everything else. Are you kidding me? It's just a small bowl of brain, and it's been cooked by a human. How could it be that delicious? Dracula looked at Gustav with a skeptical expression before taking a glance at the tofu pudding in front of him. He had to admit that the tofu pudding looked very exquisite, and it tasted very special. It didn't reek of blood in the slightest, but it struck him with the urge to give it a try. Hold on. I can't give in to temptation like this. Dracula pinched his own thigh. He couldn't slap himself in the face like that. Is it really that delicious? Everyone was also rather perplexed, and even Jinx stole a few surreptitious glances at the tofu pudding. Toros and Havid didn't hesitate any longer as they scooped spoonfuls of tofu pudding into their mouths. Oh! Both of their eyes lit up almost in unison. What an incredible flavor! This definitely isn't an ordinary brain, it's simply indescribably delicious. Havid exclaimed as he picked up the bowl on the table and quickly began to devour the tofu pudding. Delicious. It's so delicious. I've never tasted anything as delicious as this. Toros also exclaimed as his rolls of fat jiggled uncontrollably, and he was unable to repress his excitement as he began to slurp down the tofu pudding. It's so delicious. The two officials from the City Lord's castle had already begun to eat, and they wore elated expressions on their faces. I didn't think that this tofu pudding would be so delicious as well. It's completely different from the spicy grilled fish, and it's not brain, it's most likely some kind of soy product. I wonder what kind of magical cooking method Mr. Mac used to transform the coarse soybeans into such a pristine white color. The savory sauce is paired with minced pickled vegetables, and the tiny shrimp brings with it the flavor of the ocean. Everything is combined in one bite, and it's absolutely delicious. Michael also scooped a spoonful of tofu pudding into his mouth, and he immediately fell into the trap of deliciousness. One spoonful after another, he simply couldn't stop. No one can resist Father's cooking, not even demons or giant dragons. A smile appeared on Amy's face as she looked at the customers who were completely engrossed in the tofu pudding. It was as if she had already seen through everything. Aside from the sounds of the tofu pudding being eaten, the only sound that could be heard in the restaurant was the occasional exclamation of praise from everyone. The fragrance of the tofu pudding wafted throughout the restaurant, and it only became more pronounced as the tofu pudding was stirred. Chapter 428. Another savory tofu pudding, another sweet tofu pudding. A series of excited and expectant voices sounded. Me too. I'll have another savory tofu pudding. Dracula raised his hand feebly as he looked at the white porcelain bowl in his hand, which had been licked clean. I'll have another sweet tofu pudding as well. Jinx had also finished his tofu pudding, and he didn't feel embarrassed in the slightest. All right, please wait a moment, Yarbemia replied before clearing away the bowls on the table with Sally. Uncle Bat, didn't you say that you'd rather starve to death than have a bite of human food? Amy asked Dracula with a curious expression. Everyone was also looking at him with a hint of mockery in their eyes. After all, he and Jinx were the ones who had objected the most. As a vampire, adapting to different living environments and food is a basic survival skill. Dracula cleared his throat with an awkward expression on his face. His eyes lit up as he looked at Mag, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen, and a confident smile appeared on his face as he said, "Furthermore, for vampires, blood and brains are the best food to replenish energy. This tofu pudding is made from brains, so it suits the tastes of us vampires perfectly. We're definitely not vegetarian. My apologies, sir, but tofu pudding isn't actually made from brains of magical beasts. Instead, it's made from soybeans, so it's still vegetarian." Meg smiled at the confident Dracula. How? How could it be made from soybeans? It's clearly made from brains, and it's even more delicious than brains. How could it be vegetarian? Dracula's smile stiffened, and he glared at Meg as he jumped up from his seat, feeling as if his intelligence had been insulted. I think this tofu pudding is even softer and smoother than the brains I've had in the past. How could something like this be made from soybeans? You're not lying to us, are you? Gustav asked with an incredulous expression. The tofu pudding is indeed made from soybeans, and there's no meat or brains added to it. Our restaurant has always operated with integrity, and we never lie to our customers. Mag said with a smile. The names of Chinese dishes were broad and profound. If he were to make connections based on the names of the dishes, the people from the Grey Temple would have to come to the kitchen every day to search for corpses if there was a husband and wife lung slice. It's over. I've become a vegetarian again. Dracula slumped back into his seat as he stared at his bowl, which had been licked clean. He murmured with a hint of self-doubt, I didn't even notice, and I even thought that it was delicious, and I want another bowl. Could it be that I'm no longer a pure vampire? Dracula of Dracula's mouth as well? Of Dracula's face, of course, Dracula. Although the fact that it's a vegetarian dish has severely damaged my confidence, I still have to say that tofu pudding is supposed to be salty, right? How could they add sugar to such a tender thing? This flavor is unimaginable. Dracula abruptly raised his head and looked at Toros with a righteous expression. Bullshit. Tofu pudding is supposed to be sweet. Even though this isn't real brains, its sweet flavor and smooth texture are simply irresistible. How dare you say it tastes bad? Dracula, we're both demons, but you're going a little too far. Gustav chimed in as he glowered at Dracula. The tofu pudding is a little sweet to begin with, and with the addition of the savory sauce and the rich side dishes, you'll be able to experience the true flavor of the tofu pudding. This is something that you can't experience when you add a spoonful of syrup to the sweet tofu pudding. Fox put down his spoon and looked at Gustav and Dracula with a serious expression as he said, tofu pudding is supposed to be salty. Fox, your face is still as foul as ever, but I suddenly feel like you're a lot more pleasing to the eye. As expected, not everyone gets to taste something as delicious as tofu pudding. Dracula nodded as he looked at Fox. Sweet tofu pudding is the best. Jinx yelled before turning to Havid, and asking, what do you think, Havid? Havid looked at his bowl, and was just about to say something. You'll have to borrow money from me to pay for the table and chairs, Jinx added. Havid's eyes widened. He didn't think that Jinx would be so shameless. That's all right, Havid. Tell me what you think, and I'll lend you the money. Gudra waved a hand through the air. Of course the savory tofu pudding is the best. Havid replied without any hesitation. He looked at Dracula with a pleased expression, and said, don't worry, Dracula. I'll definitely return the money I borrowed from you. Sweet, salty. The restaurant was instantly plunged into a battle over the sweetness and saltiness of the tofu pudding. Furthermore, the demons and giant dragons, who were originally fighting for the benefits of their respective races, were now divided over a bowl of tofu pudding. The situation was no less intense than before. Could it be that Mr. Mac is trying to break the stalemate and create an opportunity for the tables to turn? Michael turned to Meg with a perplexed look on his face at the sight of everyone arguing with one another. He had presided over many meetings in the past, and he knew that this was a territorial dispute that had resulted in casualties on both sides, so it would take at least half a month for any substantial progress to be made. This was why he had chosen Amy's as the venue for the meeting. He wanted to see if the food would be able to catalyze the progress of the meeting. A situation like this had never happened before. However, if word got out that there was an internal strife because of a delicacy, those old bastards would probably die of anger. Meg merely smiled and didn't say anything, nor did he show any intention of mediating the conflict. He was well aware of Michael's intentions, and in order to get the City Lord's castle to hand over the vacant land to the restaurant as soon as possible, the key to the success of the meeting tonight was to be completed. Just like in his past life, territorial disputes between countries would often come to a stalemate, especially when both sides were more or less equally powerful. In a situation like this, a different approach was required. Uncle Bat, you were just arguing with the other uncles, and now you're arguing with each other again. Who's the enemy and who's the friend? Amy asked curiously after looking at them for a long while. Everyone immediately fell silent as they looked at the people sitting across from them, then at their own brethren, and peculiar expressions appeared on their faces. Yabemia brought out a bowl of tofu pudding and placed it in front of everyone, but no one made a move. Chapter 429. Everyone finished their tofu puddings with joyful expressions, and put down their bowls almost at the exact same time. They were looking at each other with less hostility, and more negotiation intent. I didn't think that a bowl of tofu pudding would be able to facilitate a negotiation. Delicacies really do work sometimes. A hint of surprise appeared in Michael's eyes. He had been worried that the two sides would fight over the tofu pudding, but it seemed that his worries were completely unnecessary. That fast? The two officials who were taking down the statements were also rather taken aback. They hurriedly put their bowls aside and picked up their pens and paper again. The content of the negotiation still had to be recorded in detail. This is probably the first negotiation that has been facilitated by tofu pudding, right? Sally also wore a peculiar expression. Negotiations were always very complicated, and the process of testing each other's bottom line was very long. Furthermore, there was no guarantee that the two sides would reach a conclusion in the end, but now, both sides were preparing to skip that step. I also don't think there's a need to quarrel over these messy matters. Since no one can convince the other, why don't we just go out of the city and fight? Let's just talk openly. The purpose of this meeting is to stop this meaningless battle. Both parties will withdraw their troops, and then decide the ownership of that island, Jinx said. That's what we're thinking as well. It was just a few brats who discovered a small island, and there weren't any treasures on it, so a fight broke out for no reason, and the impasse has reached. We demons aren't afraid of war, but it's not wise to expend too much of our combat power in a war where we don't even know what our objective is. As such, we also want to end this war. Dracula nodded as he pulled out two maps. He tossed one of them toward Jinx, and placed the other on the table in front of him. After some discussion, we've decided to give up on the ownership of this island, but at the same time, we still insist that we were the ones who discovered this island first. Even though there aren't any special minerals on it, it can still be used as a habitat for some demons. Hence, we hope that you dragons won't try to control it. Just leave it empty and become an unclaimed island. Moreover, judging from the distance between this island and the core island of our demon islands is the same as the distance between your dragon islands. Therefore, there's no such thing as saying that this island should belong to your dragon clan. Furthermore, in this war, our fiend clan has sacrificed many brave warriors. Your dragon clan has relied on its great mobility and has barely suffered any injuries. Therefore, we hope that you can compensate the families of the fallen warriors as a sign of your sincerity in this peace negotiation. Dracula pointed at the red dot on the map. You want us to cede territory and pay compensation? The dragon race has never done something like this before. If you really want to negotiate, then take back your last request and we can talk again. Fox looked at Dracula with a hint of mockery in his eyes, and he didn't even take a single glance at the map. TSK, your dragon race occupies this golden mountain called the Dragon Island. There are all kinds of rare ores everywhere below. There are countless mountains of gold and silver. Although you don't need most of them on the Dragon Island, you can just casually get some of them as compensation. Why is there a need to be so stiff here? You dragon clan are too stingy. Do you want to bury all these treasures in your caves with your dead bodies? Gustav pursed his lips. Gold is our religion. If anyone dares to target our gold, then be prepared to face the wrath of our golden dragon clan. Jinx glowered at the three of them in a domineering manner. We giant dragons take pride in collecting precious stones and gold. Who on the Norland continent doesn't know that? There's no way we'll pay compensation. People die in war. If we lose, then we'll have nothing to say about ceding territory and paying compensation. However, we're the ones who are surrounding the island, and you demons are the ones who are trapped on the island. We're already making a huge concession by not asking you to pay compensation, yet you still dare to make such a request. There's no sincerity in this negotiation at all. Fox chuckled coldly, and refused to budge an inch. The restaurant fell silent again as the two sides began to engage in an internal discussion. Spatial magic had blocked out all sound, so no one else could hear what they were saying. Compared to the mature politicians in my past life, the talks between giant dragons and demons are indeed a lot simpler. Looks like there's a good chance that we can reach an agreement tonight. A smile appeared on Meg's face as he placed the Rugiamos one by one into a paper bag, and gestured for Yarbemia to bring them out. Boss, should we bring them up now? Yarbemia was a little perplexed as he looked at Meg. They were in the middle of a heated discussion, so it wouldn't be good to interrupt them. Millimeter HM. The Rugiamos won't taste good if they're roasted for too long. Bring them up first. Meg nodded with a smile. He was going to be in charge of the pace of this discussion. All right. Yarbemia was a little concerned, but he still nodded obediently. He brought the Rugiamos out, and placed one in front of everyone with a smile as he said, "These are Rugiamos. Please enjoy." The aroma of the braised meat wafted over, and the giant dragons and demons who were in the middle of a heated discussion were immediately attracted by the Rugiamos in the paper bag in front of them. Compared to the faint fragrance of the tofu pudding, the aroma of the meat was extremely rich. It was like the aroma of a plump, mature woman. It was straightforward, and it immediately made everyone lose interest in continuing the discussion. Meat is my favorite food. Let me try the taste of meat cooked by humans. Jinx was the first to grab the Rugiamo on the table. He tore open the paper bag, and a reddish-brown braised meat was sandwiched between two white pancakes. The aroma of the meat was countless times richer than that of raw meat, and he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Then, he bit off half of the Rugiamo and began to chew. There were 2 layers of soft and fragrant Rugiamos sandwiched between the Rugiamos. He bit into the Rugiamos, and delicious gravy flowed out. The meat was fatty, but not greasy. Every single taste bud on the tip of his tongue seemed to be cheering and jumping with joy. This was a delicacy that he had never tasted before. This was the right way to eat meat. After swallowing, the delicious taste seemed to have become a little violent. It was running amok in his blood, and his heart was beating faster and faster. Raw. Chapter 430. Jinx was still holding half a Rugiamo in his hand, but a dragon tail covered in golden scales had appeared behind him, and it was slowly sweeping across the ground. However, Jinx was still completely immersed in the delicious Rugiamo, and his expression didn't change in the slightest in the face of the dragon tail that had appeared behind him. He finished the remaining half of the Rugiamo in his hand, and a joyful smile appeared on his face as he chewed. This feeling of swelling blood vessels was simply too comfortable. Even though he didn't know what this violent thing was, he could clearly sense that his body was actively reacting to it, and even his strength seemed to have increased. Even though it was only a sliver, it was still very surprising to him. Of course, the delicious taste of the Rugiamo was also one of the main reasons for this. He had never tasted such delicious meat before. Even the freshest fish in the boundless sea realm couldn't compare with it. This is a delicacy that makes you feel extremely delicious, Jinx thought to himself. He could eat 100 of such delicious Rugiamos. All of the demons and giant dragons were surprised to see Jinx's reaction, but he didn't seem to be reacting in any way. Instead, he appeared to be enjoying the food, so they all began to inspect the Rugiamos in their hands. Golden dragon tail. Yarbemia's eyes widened at the sight of the dragon tail on Jinx's back. However, she immediately covered her mouth and didn't make a sound. Fox looked up at Yarbemia, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Could this little fellow be related to the golden colossal dragon? Fox was a little perplexed as he looked at Yarbemia. He had noticed this half-dragon girl from the moment he had entered the room, but he hadn't sensed any powerful aura from her, so he figured that she was most likely just an ordinary half-dragon who had inherited human talents. But now, his reaction seemed to be a little unusual. However, the golden giant dragons had always been kind to the Draconians. Many of them even directly brought the Draconians to the Dragon Islands to live and enjoy the same treatment as the ordinary dragons. Therefore, there were very few golden giant dragon Draconians wandering outside. Interesting. I just don't know which bastard of the golden dragon tribe she belongs to. Perhaps if there's a need for her in the future, I can keep an eye on her. Fox retracted his gaze and smiled. Dragon Island had never been truly united. Even though the current chief, Rankster, had both the Golden Dragon and Frost Dragon bloodlines, the situation between the two races was still very complicated. Sometimes, someone could be used as a bargaining chip. Even if it was just a small bargaining chip, it still had value. Could it be that Amy is really a half-dragon from the Golden Dragon tribe? Meg also noticed Jinx's golden dragon tail. It was almost identical to the dragon tail that Yarbemia had after eating Rugiamo, except that Yarbemia's dragon tail was longer and thinner, and its scales were more intricate. Dragon tail pie. Amy's eyes also lit up. She looked at Yarbemia, and then at Jinx's dragon tail. She hesitated for a moment, but didn't say anything in the end. The Golden Dragon tribe's reaction to eating Rugiamo is the same as Mia's. I've speculated that MIA might have the bloodline of the Golden Dragon tribe in her, and it looks like that's very likely. Also, the Golden Dragon tribe is very accepting of half-dragons. They'll bring all of their tribesmen back to Dragon Island. I just don't know if MIA will be willing to go. Sally was a little concerned as she looked at Yarbemia. Yarbemia looked at Jinx, and opened his mouth. He hesitated for a moment, but didn't say anything in the end. He took a few steps back and looked down, trying his best not to show his emotions. Boss, give me 10 more Rugiamos. It's so delicious. Jinx swallowed the Rugiamo in his mouth, and sighed with emotion. Humans are so good at cooking. It's so much better than eating it raw. Didn't someone just say that humans eat anything? Dracula raised an eyebrow. Didn't someone say that they'd rather starve to death than eat human food? Jinx retorted. Let me try this Rugiamo as well. Dracula smiled sheepishly. He took a bite of the Rugiamo on the table, and his pale face immediately flushed red. He swallowed the Rugiamo, and panted as he waved his hand. This Rugiamo is delicious, but it's too strong. We vampires have cold blood, and I can't take it. Even though he said that, Dracula still finished the remaining half of the Rugiamo. His cheeks were flushed, and he looked very happy. He sighed, and said, "Give me another savory tofu pudding. I think that one suits me better." Yes. It's delicious. What an incredible taste. Why don't the pigs in the abyss taste as good as this? I didn't think that humans would be so picky about food. They're so much better than us demons. Exclamations and praises rang out one after another, and they were not stingy with their praises. Meg walked out of the kitchen with a smile, and said, "We can continue to provide the tofu pudding and Rugiamos. You can open the menu next to you. There are all kinds of dishes that the restaurant has to offer. You can order whatever you want." Dracula looked at Meg with a smile, and said, "Boss, your food is really delicious. Are you interested in coming back to the Demon Islands with me? I promise that your restaurant will be full every day. You won't have to worry about money." Jinx looked at Meg, and made an irresistible offer. "Screw you. The Demon Islands are poor. Boss, why don't you come back to the Dragon Islands with me? We dragons don't lack gold. As long as you can make such delicious Rugiamos for us every day, you can have as much gold as you want. There's a huge gold mine under the territory of our Golden Dragon tribe. Even we don't know how much gold there is down there. My apologies. I appreciate your kindness, but I don't have any intention of moving my restaurant elsewhere for the time being. Chaos City is a good place." Meg shook his head with a smile. He wasn't stupid. Regardless of whether he went to the Dragon Islands or the Demon Islands, he wouldn't be as free as he was now. Before he recovered his power, he had to develop his strength in a low-key manner. As for making money, he had to let the money follow him. If he followed the money, then he would be led by the nose by the money, and lose his freedom. I see. Disappointment appeared on Dracula's and Jinx's faces at the same time. Dracula sighed, and said, "Looks like I have to come to Chaos City to eat delicious food in the future." Chapter 431. Insanely spicy? Sure, please wait a moment. A mysterious smile appeared on Meg's face. You're the one who's asking for it. I'll admit defeat if I don't make you cry today. There's also fish. I love fish. I want a large spicy grilled fish as well, and I want the insanely spicy grilled fish as well. This drawing looks real. Did you use magic to turn all of these dishes into drawings? Havid asked as he flipped through the menu. I hired an amateur artist to draw this, Meg replied with a smile. The system had already upgraded all of the menus to include pictures. Host. Please explain what an amateur artist is. Even if this wasn't drawn by the system's drawing skills are at least on a professional level. The system's indignant voice sounded, but Meg ignored it. I want a Yeongju fried rice. I want a braised chicken and rice. I love chicken. Everyone else also began to place their orders. Meg turned and went into the restaurant to cook, while Yarbemia brought out one dish after another. If it's insanely spicy, do you want to know how to cook 2 insanely spicy dishes? Meg took a glance at Fox before mincing the insanely spicy pepper in his hand. Everyone was no longer in the mood to continue their discussion. All of them looked toward the kitchen with anticipation in their eyes as they waited for the dishes to be served. Uncle Jinx, you broke the chair. You have to pay for it, Amy reminded Jinx. Jinx looked back at the chair that had already been reduced to rubble, and scratched his head sheepishly as he said, this Ruggiamo was too delicious, and I couldn't help myself. I'll pay for this chair. Here are 10 Ruggiamos for you. Do you want me to get you a new chair? Yarbemia made her way over to Jinx with a slightly nervous expression on her face as she carried a tray of Ruggiamos over to him. No need, I'll eat standing up so I don't break the chair again. Jinx shook his head with a smile before picking up a Ruggiamo. He then turned to Yarbemia with a curious expression, and asked, Little girl, what dragon are you? Why are you working as a waiter here? Dragons are a proud race. No matter how delicious the food in this restaurant is, we shouldn't serve others. Yarbemia opened her mouth before lowering her head in a dejected manner. I don't know what kind of dragon I am. Is that so? Jinx looked at Yarbemia in confusion. Yarbemia looked up at Jinx with a serious expression, and said, but I like my current job. This job makes me proud, and it doesn't make me feel inferior. This is the life and job that I like. A hint of surprise appeared on Jinx's face at the sight of the confidence and pride in Yarbemia's eyes. Due to their origins, even the golden dragon half-humans on Dragon Island would have a sense of inferiority complex. However, this little girl gave him a sense of confidence, a sense of pride that was buried deep within her heart. I hope you will never lose your pride and confidence. I wish you good luck. He put the Ruggiamo in his hand into his mouth and took a big bite, immersing himself in the delicious taste of the Ruggiamo. I will. Yarbemia nodded in a soft voice, as if she were replying to Jinx, but also as if she were talking to herself. She then turned and walked into the kitchen. Here's your insanely spicy grilled fish. Yarbemia soon returned with a large grilled fish, and gently placed it in front of Fox. The massive grilled fish was covered in a bright red sauce, and there was a spicy aroma mixed with the aroma of the fish. Just a single whiff of it was enough to make one's throat burn. This smell. Why is the smell of the chili in this restaurant so rich? Just the smell alone is so pungent. It seems to be different from the chili in other restaurants. Fox narrowed his eyes. He had lived in Chaos City for many years, so he was quite familiar with human food. In fact, he was quite fond of spicy food, which was why he had chosen the insanely spicy grilled fish. However, it appeared that the chili in this fish was a little different. At the very least, this level of spiciness was something that he had never seen before. Of course, the aroma of the fish was also something that he had never smelled before. The combination of these two flavors was extremely alluring, and he couldn't help but pick up his chopsticks. A frost dragon eating the insanely spicy grilled fish is probably going to be dehydrated. Michael looked at the grilled fish in front of Fox, and shook his head with a smile. Meg hadn't given any indication of the level of insanely spicy grilled fish's insanely spicy grilled fish, so it appeared that he was taking revenge for what had happened at the entrance of the restaurant. This fish doesn't look ordinary. Just smelling this spicy smell makes me feel like my blood is boiling. Havid looked at the spicy grilled fish that Sally had just brought to him, and he couldn't help but gulp. His skin began to turn red, and it looked as if flames were going to erupt from his body at any moment. No, I have to move my chair away this time. Otherwise, I'm going to have to pay for it again, Havid picked up his chopsticks, and he didn't forget to move his chair away. He had already ascertained that even though this restaurant was opened by humans, the food here had some special effects that even giant dragons like him couldn't resist. As a giant dragon, he was indeed quite poor, and due to his poverty, he valued things like money more than anything else. Even though the dragon race would be footing the bill for this trip, there was no guarantee that the dragon race would pay for the broken chair. Both of them picked up a piece of fish with their chopsticks almost at the exact same moment. Ah! Roar! A howl of agony and an excited roar erupted almost at the exact same moment. Fox pressed his hands against the table and panted heavily with his mouth wide open. His face was as red as a monkey's bottom, and a burst of steam rose up from his body. It was as if dry ice had come into contact with water, and the steam soon enshrouded his entire body, creating a spectacular sight to behold. At the same time, Havid threw his head back and let loose a long roar, and his body was already engulfed in flames. Only the hand that was holding the chopsticks wasn't on fire. Who would have thought that there would be such a spicy fish in this world? It's so delicious, and I feel like I'm going to explode from just one bite. I've never tasted such delicious fish before. Havid looked at the grilled fish before him with an excited expression. He picked up another piece of fish with his chopsticks, and the flames on his body burned even brighter as he savored the spicy flavor of the fish wreaking havoc in his mouth. How could there be such a spicy chili? Fox placed his hands on the table, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. He looked at the bright red grilled fish in front of him, and his hand that was holding the chopsticks involuntarily slowly lifted toward the grilled fish. No, absolutely not. If I continue to eat like this, I'm going to make a fool of myself. But why am I losing control of my hands? And why do I feel like I'm crying? Am I crying? Fox's eyes widened as he watched the piece of fish being fed into his mouth. His tears flowed uncontrollably, and the mist rising from his body blurred his vision. He felt as if something was quickly flowing out of his body. Father, why is he crying? Amy turned to Meg with a perplexed expression. Chapter 432. Phew, after finishing the last piece of fish, Fox lay sprawled on the table with his entire body soaked in sweat. He felt as if all of his energy had been sapped away, and he couldn't even hold onto his chopsticks anymore. He was like a salted fish that had lost all of its dreams. How could this flavor be so impactful? I can't control myself. Fox raised his head to look at Meg, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen with a smile on his face. His eyes narrowed slightly as he murmured to himself, could it be that this guy spiked this dish to exact revenge for what happened in front of the restaurant? In any case, Fox felt as if he were completely immobilized. Even when he was in battle, he had never felt as powerless as he was right now. Double insanely spicy. Most people won't be able to handle it, and most dragons won't be able to handle it either. Meg looked at the tear-stained Fox with a smile on his face, and he was in a very good mood. He didn't force him to eat it, he was the one who had finished it, so there was no way he would be blamed for it. Wow! This is so delicious. Give me another large spicy grilled fish. I want the insanely spicy version again. If only I could get you a barrel of beer. Do you sell any beer here, boss? Havid slammed his chopsticks onto the table with an excited expression as he turned to Meg. My apologies, but the restaurant doesn't sell any beer at the moment. Meg shook his head. He was actually quite supportive of the idea of pairing grilled fish with beer, but the system hadn't given him the recipe yet. I see. That's a pity. Havid was a little disappointed, but his eyes immediately lit up as he glanced at the menu beside him. By the way, I saw that ice cream on the menu. Is it made from ice? Can you give me one? Ice cream isn't made from ice, but it is. There are 4 flavors to choose from. What flavor would you like? Meg shook his head as he looked at Havid, who was still engulfed in flames. Just the thought of seeing a huge man on fire eating ice cream was extremely impactful. Any flavor is fine. I just want to have some ice to soothe my throat before having a spicy grilled fish, Havid replied with a nonchalant wave of his hand. Okay, please wait a moment. Meg nodded and turned to enter the kitchen. Blueberry ice cream, please enjoy. Yabemia quickly made his way over to Havid with an ice cream cone in hand. This is ice cream. It looks a little small, and I can finish it in one bite, but it really is iced. Havid accepted the ice cream before inspecting it. Scorching temperatures swept through the air, and the two ice cream balls that were stacked on top of each other immediately melted. They're that weak. Havid raised an eyebrow as he prepared to bite off one of the balls. Uncle Pyro, you can't eat ice cream like that. You have to lick it. If you eat it with big bites, you won't be able to taste the delicious flavor of the ice cream, Amy hurriedly warned. Is that so? Havid was a little skeptical, but he still obediently stuck out his tongue to lick the melting ice cream. This feeling. Havid's eyes widened as the snow-like ice cream slowly melted on his tongue. The pleasant sensation of the ice cream slowly extinguished the scorching heat brought about by the spicy grilled fish, and a sweet and sour sensation swept through his body like a gentle breeze, making him feel extremely comfortable, and he involuntarily closed his eyes. He saw a petite amethyst dragon resting on a cliff. She raised her proud neck and let out a soft chant with her eyes half closed. Her voice was so cute and enchanting. Even if it was just a meaningless chant, he was still intoxicated. After that, he accidentally made a sound, and she was roused from her sleep. She turned around to look at him with a hint of surprise and wariness in her eyes before flying away. That was the first and only time they had met. He didn't get a chance to ask for her name, nor did he know where she lived, but the image of that purple figure singing with her head held high was etched deeply into his heart. In that instant, he suddenly understood what that feeling was. Perhaps this was what they called love, or perhaps it was what humans often referred to as love at first sight. Uncle Pyro, your ice cream is melting, Amy reminded. Havid hurriedly opened his eyes and licked the ice cream that was about to drip off. He enjoyed the sweet and sour flavor spreading through his mouth as he licked the ice cream with a blissful expression. He turned to Amy with a smile and said, "You're absolutely right, little girl. Licking the ice cream is the correct way to eat it, it's so delicious. Even though she's an Purple Crystal Dragon, perhaps I can visit her on Purple Crystal Island and ask for her name when I get back. At the very least, I won't have any regrets." Havid thought to himself as he licked the ice cream, and a faint blush appeared on his face. Uncle Pyro looks really cute eating ice cream. Father, can Amy have some ice cream as well? Amy turned to Meg as she asked. Of course. What flavor would Amy like? Meg nodded with a smile. He looked at Havid, whose entire body was engulfed in flames, but he was carefully licking the ice cream in his hand. It was indeed quite an adorable sight. Vanilla. Amy hasn't had vanilla ice cream before, Amy replied in a matter-of-fact manner. All right, I'll make it for you. Meg patted Amy's head with a smile before entering the restaurant. Everyone was immersed in the delicious food, and they enjoyed an unprecedented feast. Demons and giant dragons weren't proficient in cooking, and most of the time, they didn't even have the concept of cooking. However, the food that Meg had made today had completely upended their worldview. It turned out that food could become so delicious after being cooked. It was completely different from eating it raw. Burp. A burp sounded in the dining hall. Then, as if it was contagious, the entire dining hall was filled with burps. Even the two civil officials in charge of recording were burping with satisfaction while rubbing their round bellies. City Lord Michael, if the conference continues tomorrow, will it still be held in this restaurant? Dracula asked. Everyone else also turned to Michael upon hearing that. Chapter 433. Everyone turned to Meg in unison. Before anyone had a chance to say anything, Meg had already declined with a smile, "My apologies, but the restaurant will be open as usual tomorrow. We won't be providing reservation services. Boss, we'll still pay you even if the restaurant is open as usual. There are only a few of us here, and it'll be much easier for us to serve so many customers compared to you. We'll be reserving the entire restaurant for the entire day tomorrow." That's settled then. Jinx looked at Meg with a determined expression. "My apologies, but the restaurant doesn't provide reservation services during normal business hours. This is a rule of the restaurant, and it's also a promise to our customers. If you'd like to continue eating the restaurant's food, you can come back during business hours tomorrow." Meg declined with a polite smile. He then glanced at the clock on the wall and said, "Also, the reservation period for today is almost over. If there's anything else you'd like to order, you can continue to order. The restaurant will be closed at 9 p.m. sharp." Huh. Everyone turned to Meg with peculiar expressions. They didn't think that Meg would refuse their request to reserve the entire restaurant. It appeared that he wasn't going to negotiate at all. Furthermore, he was going to kick them out. "I'd like another Yeongju fried rice and a savory tofu pudding," Dracula said as he glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already 8:40 a.m. "I'd like another spicy grilled fish. Make it super spicy this time. I can't stand the insanely spicy grilled fish." Burp. Everyone burped as they ordered their food. Although they felt full, it would be cruel to not eat a little when the opportunity to eat such delicious food was right in front of them. "All right, please wait a moment." Mag nodded with a smile. He turned around and went into the kitchen. He glanced sideways at the two parties who were facing each other again at the dining table. The smile on his face grew wider as he thought to himself, "It's time to make the final decision, right? Burp. Let's settle this. We demons don't need any compensation from you, and don't expect us to apologize to you, either. Both parties will leave that island, and neither of us will occupy it. We'll go back to our homes and do whatever we want. Then, make an announcement to the public, saying that we fought to a draw, and no one won. Then, it will end like this." Dracula burped. He looked at the three giant dragons sitting opposite him, and said, "Let's have some free time in Chaos City for the next few days. It's not easy to come here, and it's so boring to spend every day with you guys. I'll go and look at the pretty ladies on the streets before coming to Mammoth for delicious food. That's the life I want. How can the meeting between the two races be so trifling? Moreover, the colossal dragon tribe has always had the upper hand in this battle. How can there be a tie? This matter, Fox struggled to sit up and spoke in a determined tone. "I agree. Let's sign the document tomorrow. I have some urgent matters to attend to. I think Dracula's suggestion and conditions are reasonable, so I can accept it." Havid raised his hand as he cut off Fox's words. "If we can't hold the meeting at Mammoth, then we won't be able to eat delicious Ruggiamo. That's really unfortunate, so I agree with Dracula's suggestion. Let's end this meeting here. The issue has been resolved, and our giant dragon warriors can go back and rest." Jinx also raised his hand. He looked at Fox with a dark expression, and said, "Fox, we agreed that if there were any disagreements among us, then we would have to vote. Now, it's 2-1, so it's decided. You're being irresponsible toward the dragon race. I'm going to announce this to the public. I'd like to see how you're going to explain this to the public." Fox was fuming with rage as he pointed at Havid and Jinx with trembling fingers. "Fox, you might have a big mouth, but you have to remember that we have two mouths. Do you think they'll believe you or us? Don't think that we don't know what you're thinking. The Frost Dragon race has indeed contributed a lot in this war, but for the dragon race, ending this war is the best choice." Havid looked at Fox with a serious expression. Fox took a meaningful glance at Havid and Jinx, and even though he was a little reluctant, he still clenched his fists and didn't say anything. As expected, Mr. Mac really is something else. If it weren't for the fact that I don't want Chaos City to lose its best restaurant, I would have poached him to become a member of the think tank no matter how much it costs. A smile appeared on Michael's face, and he leaned back comfortably in his chair as he listened to the two sides enter the final stage of the negotiation. This meeting was the most efficient one that he had ever hosted, and it could be used as a model. All he had to do was change the location of the meeting. The two officials from the City Lord's castle had just finished their meal and were about to take a break, but they quickly pulled out a pen and paper to record the contents of the meeting. They didn't think that the meeting would come to a conclusion so quickly. During this meeting, Dykus, who had been serving at the side, was also very surprised. He looked at Mag in the kitchen, and a hint of admiration appeared on his face. Rather than saying that the City Lord was the one hosting the meeting, the person who was truly guiding the progress of the meeting was actually Meg, who had disrupted the pace of the meeting with a few dishes. When the City Lord agreed to Meg's conditions the day before, and even postponed the meeting until the evening. Dicus didn't believe that Meg would be able to contribute to the meeting. However, it seemed that all of the City Lord's expectations had been fulfilled, and the meeting was concluded in a single day. There was no one else in the City Lord's castle who could do a better job than Meg. Both parties clearly had a plan in mind, so after entering the negotiation stage, things progressed very smoothly. After a few minor discrepancies were resolved, they basically reached a consensus, and all they had to do was arrange for the documents to be signed the next day. I heard that the meeting was going to be very troublesome, but it looks like it's a lot easier than I thought. Dracula adjusted his clothes with a relaxed expression. I think so too. Demons are more straightforward than I thought. Even though we'll inevitably have to fight in the future, we still had a good time eating together today. Jinx nodded, and everyone burst into laughter. The final dishes were served one after another, and everyone got up to leave after eating. Fox had recovered some of his strength, and he walked out of the restaurant in a rather awkward manner. When he reached the door, he turned back to look at the restaurant's signboard, and murmured to himself with a sinister expression, "Just you wait. I'll make you pay for the humiliation I've suffered today tenfold someday." Chapter 434. Fox, Jinx of the Golden Dragon Tribe, Havid of the Fire Dragon Tribe, and a demon. I didn't think that the meeting would be held at Mammoth. Outside the restaurant, a figure was hiding behind a large tree. Elizabeth was a little surprised to see everyone emerge from the restaurant. Fox looks like he has his eyes on this restaurant. That half-dragon girl by the name of Yarbemia is in this restaurant. Could it be that Fox has his eyes on her? Elizabeth's brows furrowed. She didn't know how she had ended up here, but she couldn't help but think of Yarbemia at the sight of this restaurant. It shouldn't be her. There was no reaction after our blood came into contact with each other, nor was there any reaction from the Golden Dragon origin. However, if Fox has his eyes on him, then perhaps I can keep an eye on him and see what he's up to. Elizabeth shook her head. She hesitated momentarily as Fox reluctantly drew a spell formation before departing. Her eyes then lit up as she thought to herself, Fox seems to be very feeble right now. Perhaps this is my only chance to infiltrate his place. I might be able to find more information about my father there. A huge white snowflake appeared beneath Elizabeth's feet, and she disappeared on the spot amid a flash of white light. After bidding farewell to all of the guests, Sally and Yarbemia also left after cleaning up the restaurant. Meg closed the door of the restaurant before carefully carrying the two sleeping little ones upstairs. Phew! What a fulfilling day. Meg looked at the adorable little ones in bed, and gently stroked their little nose. A sense of exhaustion welled up in his heart as he picked up his bathrobe and made his way to the bathroom. After soaking in the large bathtub, Meg closed his eyes as he asked internally, "System, I've already obtained the venue, so the mission should be a success, right? The lease contract has not been signed yet, so you don't have the right to use the space in front of the restaurant, so the mission is not yet complete," the system replied in a serious voice. "All right, then I'll wait for tomorrow." Meg didn't really care. He wasn't in a hurry anyway, so he could afford to wait for a day. "By the way, system, what level do you think my current strength should be?" Meg suddenly asked after soaking for a while. The host's current physical condition is quite complicated. His physical fitness is only at the level of an ordinary person. His strength is still some distance away from that of a level 1 knight. His swordsmanship is close to that of a level 4 knight. His speed is at the level of a level 2 knight. His overall strength is at the peak of a level 2 knight. In a short distance, his strength can reach the level of a level 4 knight. The system was silent for a while before giving a detailed evaluation. Meg pondered for a moment and asked, "Can we understand it this way? You can definitely win against a level 2, you can fight a level 3, but you may not necessarily win. If you encounter a level 4, you have no chance of winning unless you are within a sword's distance." The host's comprehension ability is still not bad. If you don't want to be casually killed by others, it's better to keep a low profile when you encounter an opponent of level 3 and above, the system replied. "I'm just a chef. This identity is enough to keep a low profile. Moreover, the more famous I am, the less people will associate me with Meg Alex, and they won't think that I have powerful strength." Meg raised his head comfortably, and a smile appeared on his face as he said, "A person, to be able to do something to the extreme, he needs to devote his heart and soul to it. When he practiced his swordsmanship to the extreme, no one would believe that his hands would be able to pick up a kitchen knife and a spoon, and make all kinds of mouth-watering delicacies. This is my true protective color. Luna, it's already so late. Why don't you sleep at my place tonight? I'll serve you in bed." Vivian held Luna's hand in the City Lord's mansion, and said with a smile, "No, I still have classes tomorrow." Luna shook her head, and looked at Vivian exasperatedly as she said, "Moreover, you've just recovered a little recently. You need to rest well. Once you've completely recovered, you can eat whatever you want and do whatever you want. Don't run around anymore. TSK, TSK. You used to hug me and call me sweetie, but now you're pushing me away. Tell me, do you have another man outside?" Vivian refused to let go of Luna's hand. She narrowed her eyes and sized up Luna for a while with an expression as if she had seen through everything. "I say, don't tell me you've really fallen for Mr. Mac. Just now, whenever he was mentioned, your eyes would light up. Although he's quite handsome, he's quite tall, and his cooking is delicious. He has a gentle personality, a kind heart, and a good conversational style. His IQ and EQ are both very high, and his restaurant business is doing so well, so he must be making a lot of money. If that's the case, he's a man that I can't resist at all, right? You're lying. How could I possibly fall for Mr. Meg? I just admire his personality and his cooking. I don't have any other thoughts." Luna chuckled as she slapped the back of Vivian's hand. "Really?" Vivian stared at Luna for a while in disbelief. After confirming that she didn't see anything strange, she smiled, and said, "If you don't, then forget it. What a pity. If you become the lady boss, then I'll be able to eat and drink for free every day, and I'll even be able to eat a second helping of tofu pudding. In your dreams. I still want to eat a second helping of tofu pudding." Luna flicked Vivian's forehead, and let go of her hand. "All right, I'm going back now. It'll be difficult to travel when it's dark. Don't worry. I've already told the coachman to take you back. Miss Luna is so beautiful, I don't want to leave you alone on the streets." Vivian smiled as she held onto Luna's hand, and walked out. "Luna, you're the young mistress of the Ferde family. You can't just fall in love with anyone. Only I am worthy of you." Vivian lifted the curtains of the carriage as she walked Luna into the carriage. She stood on her tiptoes as she looked at Luna with a smile. "Stop joking around. When you get better, I think Uncle City Lord will start picking a husband for you," Luna said snappily with a smile. "If that's the case, then I'd rather never recover. I'll just go to Mr. Mac's restaurant and eat a grilled fish to prolong my life." Vivian clasped a hand over her heart with a pained expression. "That's nonsense." Luna glared at Vivian before stroking Vivian's hair with a sympathetic expression. A sweet smile appeared on her face as she said, "All right, I don't have any classes in the afternoon on Tuesday, so I'll have spicy grilled fish with you tonight. You said it yourself. I'll come pick you up." Vivian immediately came to her senses. She slapped the shaft of the carriage, and said, "Gary, take Miss Luna back to her dormitory, and don't stop at the entrance of the school. Make sure she goes upstairs before you come back." "Yes, young mistress," the middle-aged coachman replied before slowly driving the carriage away. Chapter 435. The next morning, Meg woke up early to prepare ingredients. He then woke Amy up for breakfast before taking her to Chaos School to attend Crassus' class. "Teacher Crassus, can I add this purple crystal to my wand?" Amy asked as soon as she saw Crassus after entering the magic lab. She opened her little hand to reveal a small purple crystal. "This is just an ordinary purple crystal. We added the eye of a 9th-tier magic beast, purple gold flaming bird, to your wand. You'll be able to see everything within a radius of 5 kilometers through its projection. It's much more beautiful than this little crystal." Crassus shook his head with a smile as he placed the little crystal back into Amy's hand. He smiled, and said, "The wand is almost complete. I can give it to Amy tonight. But this isn't an ordinary purple crystal. This is the most precious thing that Jessica gave to Amy from her father. Amy looked up at Crassus with a serious expression. Crassus looked into Amy's eye for a while, and the benevolent smile on his face became even more pronounced. He patted her head and nodded with a smile as he said, "All right, then I'll add this precious crystal to your wand as well." "Thank you, Master Crassus," Amy yelled with elation. She then turned to Meg and asked, "Father, would Jessica be very happy to see this?" "I think so." Meg nodded with a smile as he turned to Crassus with gratitude in his eyes. Crassus put away the purple crystal with a smile, and said, "Arthur should be arriving at Chaos City today, and he'll be accompanied by some little guys from the Magus Tower. They're clearly here to congratulate me on accepting a disciple, but those old farts are definitely up to no good. They're most likely here to stir up trouble and challenge little Amy." "Challenge me? Master Crassus, are you saying that a bad guy wants to fight with Amy?" Amy looked at Crassus curiously. "Lord Crassus, Amy has just started learning magic. She won't be in danger if she encounters a powerful magician, right?" Meg was also a little worried. It seemed that Crassus wasn't very popular in the Magus Tower. Even when he was recruiting disciples, there were people who came to cause trouble. "You don't have to worry about that. If those old fogies still had any sense of shame, they wouldn't have sent their second-generation disciples here. Otherwise, the Magus Tower would be humiliated on the entire continent. As for those kids, they can do whatever they want. Amy may have only studied magic for a few weeks, but she's still my disciple, so she'll have no problem taking care of them." Crassus waved his hand nonchalantly. "Don't worry, Father, Amy will definitely defeat them." Amy also looked at Meg with a serious expression, and her little face was filled with confidence. "I'm sure Amy will be able to do it." Meg nodded with a smile. Seeing as Crassus had said so, he was relieved. With him by their side, they wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. After exiting the Magic Academy, Meg bumped into Hyder as soon as he reached the school gate. "What a coincidence, Mr. Meg. I didn't think that we'd meet again. I was going to visit you today, but I didn't think that I'd run into you here. Do you have time? I have a few questions I'd like to discuss with you about that steam engine." Hyder's eyes lit up at the sight of Meg, and he made his way over to him. "My apologies, Principal Hyder, but I have to go back to cook now, so I don't have time to discuss things with you. If you have any questions, perhaps you can come by when the restaurant is closed. Even though I might not be able to provide any useful ideas, I'd still like to hear from you." Mag smiled as he looked at Heidel, whose hair was a little disheveled. It was quite clear that he hadn't slept well during this period of time as his eyes were quite bloodshot. "I see. All right, I won't disturb your business, Mr. Meg. I don't have any classes in the afternoon, so I'll come by your restaurant in the afternoon." Havid nodded with a smile, and didn't insist. "All right, goodbye." Meg nodded before departing from the school. He rode his bicycle slowly toward the restaurant. The Aden Square wasn't very lively in the morning. Many of the shops along the street were still closed, and the people on the street were either walking quickly with breakfast in their hands, or taking a nap as they walked. The square was paved with grey marble, and it shimmered under the morning sun. The evergreen trees planted in the square were still full of vitality, and hadn't withered in the face of the arrival of autumn. Everything was peaceful and tranquil. It's completely different from the alternate world that I envisioned when I was a child, but it's not bad. A smile appeared on Meg's face as he occasionally greeted the customers who recognized him along the way. Meg stopped his bicycle in front of the restaurant and greeted the long line of customers. Aside from Yarbemia and Sally, there was also Dicus, who was holding a document in his hand. "Mr. Meg, I've been ordered by the city lord to bring you the lease contract. After you sign this contract, you'll have the right to use the empty space in front of the restaurant." Dicus looked at Meg with a smile, and his gaze lingered on the bicycle for a while. "All right, please come in, Mr. Dicus." Meg opened the door with a smile, and allowed Dicus to enter first. He didn't think that the city lord's castle would be so efficient as to deliver the contract so early in the morning. "Mr. Mack is renting the empty space in front of the restaurant. Is he planning to expand the restaurant? He's not planning to open an outdoor restaurant, is he?" Isn't it a little strange to eat on the street? What's wrong with that? As long as I can eat Mr. Mac's food, I'm willing to squat in front of the restaurant. Speaking of which, isn't the point that Mr. Mac managed to rent the empty space in the Aiden Square from the City Lord's castle? That's something that has never happened before. Mr. Mac is indeed not an ordinary person. The customers in front of the restaurant were all discussing animatedly, and they were all curious about what Meg was planning to do. Boss, are you really planning to open an outdoor restaurant? Are you really going to rent the empty space in front of the City Lord's castle just because I mentioned it a few days ago? Yarbemia looked at Meg, who was parking his bicycle, and her eyes were filled with gratitude. Chapter 436. We'll keep it a secret. Meg nodded with a smile as he took the document from Dyke's hands and began to read it carefully. The content of the document was actually very simple. It clearly stated the responsibilities of both parties, as well as the area that Mammis could use, as well as the scope of the business license, the restaurant. Apart from that, there was also a confidentiality agreement and a 3-year lease contract, with a rent of 1 copper coin per year. Even friendship prices weren't that exaggerated. It could be said that Mammis could use the restaurant for free. There were no problems with the contract, so Meg signed it right away. Mr. Meg's performance last night was very impressive. If you were a politician, you would definitely be able to control the entire situation. Dykus put away the document and looked at Meg with a sincere expression. I'm just a chef. Meg shook his head with a smile. He looked at Dykus and said, the restaurant is about to open for business. Would you like to return to the City Lord's castle now, or do you want to have breakfast first? I came here on an empty stomach this morning. Dykus smiled. All right, please take a seat and rest for a while. The restaurant will be open for business soon. Meg nodded with a smile. By the way, the City Lord's castle's finance department has to apply for the reservation fee before they can send the money over to Mr. Mac. It should be sent over today, Dykus added. All right. Meg nodded with a smile. He wasn't worried that the City Lord's castle would go back on their word. Furthermore, he didn't feel guilty about accepting the 300,000 copper coins. He had put in a lot of effort and thought to promote the success of the meeting last night. At 7:30, Meg opened the restaurant's doors with a smile and said, Welcome, the restaurant has released a new ice cream today. There are 4 flavors to choose from, so feel free to give it a try. However, the ice cream is cold, so it's not suitable for eating on an empty stomach. I suggest that you eat it after breakfast. Also, each person is limited to 2 per meal. Another new product. Mr. Mac is so awesome. The speed at which he's releasing new products is incredible. I don't know what ice cream is, but I've decided to order one first. Mr. Mac's products have never been disappointed. The eyes of the customers in the line all lit up upon hearing this, and they discussed among themselves as they walked in. Mr. Mac. Long time no see. A tall figure walked over and looked at Meg with a silly smile. It was Hagar, who had not been here for a long time. Hagar followed behind him. Haha, how's your hand? Meg asked concernedly as he looked at Hagar's arm, which was hanging around his neck with a piece of wood and cloth. Hagar hadn't come back since the last internal conflict. He had heard from Harbeng that the war was over and that Hagar had led his people to victory. He didn't expect that he would still be injured. It's nothing. It's just a small problem. Hagar shook his head with a silly smile. He was still not fluent in the common language of the continent. He glanced around the restaurant as if he was looking for something. Amy went to Chaos School for lessons, and she mentioned you a few days ago. She'll be very happy to know that you're back. Meg said with a smile. Hagar and Harbeng were the restaurant's first customers, so Amy remembered them very well. Is that so? Studying. Good. Hagar scratched his head as he saw the people behind him waiting to enter, so he hurriedly walked into the restaurant. Bernice stopped at the entrance of the restaurant and turned to Mag with a smile as she said, Congratulations, Boss Mag. All 5 of your dishes have made it to the top 100 on the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings Board. This is an unprecedented feat. You're too humble, Boss Bernice. I heard that your restaurant made it into the top 10 this time. Mammoth is still a far cry from that. Mag shook his head with a smile. Bernice was also the owner of a restaurant in the Aden Square. Earlier, a few of the restaurant owners had come to dine together, and after that, they would occasionally come to dine together, so they had become quite familiar with each other. Mr. Mack, you're making me feel a little embarrassed. If it weren't for the size of your restaurant, all of your dishes would have made it into the top 10. Bernice shook her head with a smile, and continued, also, I heard that the Catering Association is preparing to change the rules of the Aden Square food competition. The rankings will no longer be decided by the votes of the customers. Perhaps next month's Aden Square food competition will be dominated by Mammoth. Thank you, Boss Bernice. Please come in. Meg shook his head with a smile. Even though he was being praised, he didn't become complacent. If the system hadn't given him a mission, Meg wouldn't have been willing to buy a ticket that cost 1 copper coin. He didn't care about rankings at all. Another new dish. I heard from Master Marcy that the sweet tofu pudding was super delicious last time, but these customers are also saying that the other dishes are also super delicious. Which one should I eat? Kenny stroked his bulging wallet with a conflicted expression. Kenny was an apprentice at Lace's barbershop. He was 15 years old this year, and he was a little thin and frail with a head of soft, wavy blonde hair. He had been an apprentice for over 3 months, and the barbershop provided food and accommodation. He was responsible for washing the customers' hair every day. In the beginning, he was often scolded by customers for using too much water or using too much force. However, he was becoming more and more proficient at it now, and he had even been praised by a customer the day before. There was still over half a year before he could officially start learning how to cut hair. Even though it was a little difficult, Kenny was confident that he could persevere. As long as he could learn how to cut hair, he would be able to make a name for himself regardless of whether he stayed in the shop as a barber or returned to the village to open his own barbershop. Yesterday, the boss had given them their wages, and left some money to be sent home. Kenny also wanted to reward himself, so he came to try the delicious sweet tofu pudding that the best chef in the shop, Master Marcy, had mentioned. It was said that one serving cost 200 copper coins, which was almost half his monthly salary. Kenny gripped the money pouch tightly. Even though it was quite heavy, it was filled with 200 copper coins. Kenny took a deep breath and made up his mind. He followed the customer in front of him into the restaurant. The 2 beautiful waitresses made him falter slightly before he lowered his head shyly. He had never seen such beautiful waitresses before, not even in the shop. Soon, the lavish decor in the restaurant attracted his attention. The dazzling chandeliers, intricate murals, and beautiful decorations on the walls made him feel a little dazzled. This was the first time that he had been to such a luxurious place. Sir, there's an empty seat over there. There's a menu on the table. You can take a look at what you want to eat. Yarbemia looked at Kenny with a smile. Oh, okay. Kenny looked at Yarbemia's warm smile, and he immediately felt less nervous. He sat down on the seat next to her, and flipped open the menu on the table. His eyes immediately lit up. Is this the tofu pudding? It looks so delicious. There's a big piece of meat sandwiched between 2 pancakes. It looks so delicious. This fish. I've never eaten fish before. It looks so delicious too. Chapter 437. After looking through all of the dishes on the menu with excitement on his face, Kenny looked at the prices at the bottom of the menu, and fell silent. For 200 copper coins, I can only eat tofu pudding or ice cream. If Master Marcy says tofu pudding is delicious, then it must be very delicious. However, if I eat ice cream, then I'll be able to eat it before Master Marcy does. That way, I'll be able to join in on their conversation next time, right? Kenny was conflicted between the tofu pudding and ice cream, and he didn't know which one to choose. Little guy, trying new things is what young people should do. The old man sitting beside him chuckled as he ordered a sweet tofu pudding. I'd like an ice cream with chocolate flavor. Kenny closed the menu, and turned to Yarbemia. He had never heard of chocolate, and it was even more peculiar than the other 3 flavors. Sure, please wait a moment. Yarbemia took a glance at Kenny, and nodded with a smile. She didn't ask any questions, as she could see a shadow of herself in this young man. She didn't need to ask why he only ordered an ice cream. "Thank you." Kenny was quite flattered by Yarbemia's response. His eyes gradually lit up at the sight of Yarbemia ordering food for the customers with a smile on her face. He suddenly knew what he should do after he learned how to cut hair and become a barber. He was going to stay in Chaos City and work at Lace's barbershop. He was going to become the best barber in Lace's barbershop, and then save money to open his own barbershop in Chaos City. "One day, I'm going to sit here and order whatever I want from the menu, just like them. I won't have to make difficult decisions just because I only have 200 copper coins in my pocket." Kenny clenched his fists tightly, and a confident smile appeared on his face. "Haga, you're also in Chaos City? Is your hand all right?" Morbai had also come for breakfast, and he was a little surprised to see Haga and Harbeng sitting down across from them. "Yes, last night. I just arrived. My hand is fine, it's just a little broken, but it should be fine after a while." Haga smiled, and extended his uninjured hand toward Morbai with a grateful expression as he said, Thank you, Boss Morbai. We were able to win this battle all thanks to your timely assistance. There's no need to thank us. I thought you'd be the next chief, but I didn't think you'd come to Chaos City so soon." Morbai shook Haga's hand with a smile. "That's what my father wants, but he doesn't want to do it. If I were him, I wouldn't want to do it either. If I became the chief, I wouldn't have so much freedom. I wouldn't be able to come to Chaos City to eat Boss Mag's delicious food," Harbeng said with a smile. Harbeng's smile. The three of them chatted for a while. Haga looked around and asked curiously, "Conti Nicholas? Is he okay? You mean that donkey rider? I haven't seen him in a long time. He said he was going to a remote town in the north to look for a giant dragon, and he left for about half a month. I haven't seen him in the restaurant since. With that guy's power, it's fine if he didn't meet a giant dragon. If he did, I'm afraid he wouldn't be able to come back." Harbeng shook his head. "Conti might be more powerful than we've imagined. I've seen many knights. Generally, the more powerful they are, the fewer they talk. Usually, those who talk too much will die faster. Knights like him usually live longer." Morbai said with a smile. Clip-clop tilde. Right at this moment, the sound of donkey hooves sounded. A black donkey carrying a silver-grey figure slowly came over. It stopped outside the restaurant's window for a while, and the person on the donkey jumped off and tied the donkey to a tree nearby. "Hey, he's here. Looks like he didn't meet a giant dragon this time," Harbeng said with a smile as he looked at Conti, who was walking into the restaurant. With a tinkling sound, Conti pushed open the door and came in with a smile on his face. He was a little surprised to see that the restaurant was almost full. Then his eyes fell on the only empty seat left at Harbeng's table, and he strode over. "Hey, donkey-riding dragon slayer, did you meet a giant dragon this time?" Harbeng asked with a smile as if he were an old friend. The customers nearby all looked at Conti with curiosity. Dragon-slaying dragon slayer was a very special title on the Norland continent. The last person to use this title to its fullest was Meg Alex, a man who stood at the pinnacle of the Norland continent. He was bathed in dragon's blood, and no knight could compare to him. There were strong and weak giant dragons, so there were many knights who could slay dragons. Many knights took pride in slaying an evil giant dragon. Of course, in the past 3 years after Meg Alex's death, no knight on the Norland continent had slain a 10th-tier giant dragon. Long time no see." Haga looked up at Conti with a smile and nodded. "Long time no see. Let me show you something." Conti wasn't in a hurry to answer Haga's question. Instead, he rummaged through his pocket and quickly pulled out a small black pouch from the software. He tipped it over on the table, and a pale golden dragon scale fell onto the table, emitting a soft glow under the light. "This is..." Harbeng leaned over and stared at it for a while before exclaiming, "The scale of a 10th-tier giant winged dragon? Donkey-riding dragon, you didn't really slay a 10th-tier giant winged dragon, did you?" "Really?" Haga asked with a surprised expression. All of the customers in the restaurant turned to look at them upon hearing that. Many of them stood up and craned their necks to see what was going on. Dragon-slaying warriors were rare, and 10th-tier giant dragons were even rarer. A dragon-slaying warrior who had slain a 10th-tier giant dragon was the first knight after Meg Alex to do so, and that was enough to make his name known across the Norland continent. Conti really slayed a giant dragon? Meg also looked out with a curious expression. He was also very curious about Conti's power, but he had never seen him in action. However, he could tell that he was serious about slaying a giant dragon, even though he had to consider whether he could really catch up to a giant dragon while riding a donkey. Slaying a dragon? Yarbemir looked at Conti with a hint of fear in his heart. Was this middle-aged man who always had a smile on his face this terrifying? This is indeed the scale of a 10th-grade giant winged dragon. Conti maintained his calm smile under everyone's gazes. It really is a 10th-tier giant dragon. There was a sudden exclamation in the restaurant. The guests were shocked. They were wondering if Harbeng had made a mistake, but now Conti admitted it himself. Could it be that this man really was the first knight after Meg Alex to slay a 10th-tier giant dragon? Chapter 438. But I picked it up. Conti put away the dragon scale on the table, and lamented, I was late again. I only found this dragon scale when I arrived, and the battle was already over. It should have been a battle between two giant dragons. Sigh, all of the customers sighed with disappointment. They all returned to their seats, and put down their hands that were about to clap. They had thought that they would be able to witness the birth of a legend. Who would have thought that this would be the result? It's only been a while since we last met, and you've already become naughty. You made me happy for nothing. Harbeng rolled his eyes with a speechless expression. Haga gave a bashful smile, and wasn't angry at all. One young Jew fried rice, one Ruggiamo, thank you. Conti removed his large sword from his waist, and stood beside the table. He looked at Yarbemir with a smile, and didn't explain anything. He's also an interesting person. Meg faltered slightly before shaking his head with a smile. He didn't think that this would be the result. It's a pity that Alex is dead. Otherwise, we'd be able to hear about his legendary dragon-slaying stories every once in a while. The reason why the Norland continent is so peaceful has to do with him slaying those evil dragons. Storyteller Carl heaved a forlorn sigh. Master Carl, why don't you tell another story about Alex slaying dragons next time? I've loved hearing stories about him since I was a child. He was the knight I admired the most, and a true man. Jimmy turned to Carl with an expectant look in his eyes. All of the other customers also turned to him upon hearing that. Stories about Alex had been widely spread on the continent in the past few years, but they were generally just rumors about where he had slain another evil dragon. As for the specifics, they didn't know. Carl was the best storyteller in Chaos City. He had told stories about Alex slaying dragons in the past, and every one of those stories had been sold out. However, he hadn't told stories about Alex since 3 years ago. Now that Jimmy had mentioned it, everyone was looking at Carl expectantly, wondering if he would agree. Since the legend has passed away, we only need to remember him. There's no need to talk about him. I don't like doing that. Carl shook his head and paused for a moment. He then smiled and shook his head. I want to tell a story about a dragon slayer in my lifetime. I don't know if there will be a chance. What kind of person will the main character be? Everyone looked at the white-haired Carl. It had been 3 years since a publicly acknowledged dragon slayer had appeared on the Norland continent. No one could be sure if Carl would be able to see one in his lifetime. Don't worry, you'll have a chance. A smile appeared on Mag's face as he looked at Carl. There was still a frost dragon left for Amy. If he worked hard, he would have reached the 10th tier by then, right? Kenny's ice cream was the first to be brought out, and everyone's eyes followed the ice cream in Yarbemir's hand. It was exactly the same as the picture on the menu. It was a small cone with 2 black and white snowballs on top. Dense cold air rose from it, and it looked quite cute, but they didn't know how it would taste. Here's your chocolate ice cream. Please enjoy. Yarbemir handed the ice cream to Kenny with a smile, and said, you can slowly lick it with your tongue. All right, thank you. Kenny carefully held the ice cream in his hands, and his eyes were completely drawn to the ice cream. Dense cold air wafted toward him, bringing with it a sweet milky aroma. There was also a fragrance that he had never smelled before. It was most likely the so-called chocolate aroma, and it was a delightful aroma that he was immediately intoxicated by. The two little snowballs were a perfect blend of white milk and black chocolate, and they were intertwined together like two smooth ribbons. They looked extremely intricate, and he wondered what kind of method had been used to achieve this. Is this ice cream? Everyone's eyes were also drawn to the ice cream in Kenny's hand. Every new dish that the restaurant released attracted a lot of attention, but before they tried it themselves, they had to see how others reacted to it to determine whether it was worth trying. Kenny swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and his stomach grumbled from not having eaten anything in the morning. He couldn't help but stick out his tongue to take a lick of the ice cream. The first thing that struck him when his tongue came into contact with the ice cream was a cool sensation. He could then feel the ice cream slowly melting on the tip of his tongue, and a rich and seductive sweetness slowly flowed into his mouth. The alluring milky aroma filled his mouth, and the texture was extremely rich and mellow. It was as if a gentle hand had gently slid down his cheek, then slowly down his neck. What an incredible taste! The milk is so fragrant, but it's not just milk. After entering my mouth, the wonderful and mellow sweetness gushes out in layers. The layers are so distinct, and it's so delicious. After swallowing, Kenny looked at the ice cream in his hand with an incredulous expression, and he couldn't help but lick it again. He closed his eyes to savor this unparalleled delicious experience, and it was as if he were holding a beautiful young woman in his arms. He was licking his lips gently, fearful that he would hurt her if he used too much force. It looks delicious, isn't it? Do you want me to have one as well? Jimmy looked at Kenny, who was licking his ice cream with an expression of enjoyment, and he patted his pocket as he fell into deep thought. He had just received his allowance for this month, but if he wanted to survive this month, he had to be frugal. He had just ordered a tofu pudding, and if he ordered another ice cream, then he wouldn't be able to eat at Amy's tomorrow. I want an ice cream, and I want the same flavor. Serve it after I finish my Yangju fried rice, a young man said as he raised his hand. Father, I also want to eat ice cream. I want to eat it too. Can you buy one for me, please? A little Loli hugged her father's arm, and her large eyes were filled with anticipation. No, your mother said that you can't eat anything cold in the morning. The father shook his head with a resolute expression. I don't want it. I want to eat it. I want to eat ice cream. The little Loli immediately burst into tears upon hearing this, and tears streamed down her face, making her appear rather pitiful. Baby, don't cry, don't cry. I'll ask your mother in the afternoon, and see if she's willing to let you eat ice cream. Otherwise, we'll both be punished to stand when we get back. The father hurriedly coaxed his daughter carefully, and picked up the sweet tofu pudding that had just been placed on the table. Here, your favorite tofu pudding is here. Let's eat it first. Chapter 439. All of the customers nearby looked at the little Loli who was slumped in her chair with kind smiles on their faces. She was so chubby and adorable. The young father looked at his daughter, who had snuck a peek at him before immediately closing it again, and he was both resigned and amused. He looked at Kenny, who was happily licking his ice cream, and hesitated momentarily before smiling in a resigned manner. All right, eat the tofu pudding and half a bowl of fried rice, and I'll buy you some ice cream. Really? The little Loli opened her eyes and looked at her father. When have I ever lied to you? The father asked with a smile. All right, then I'll eat it myself. Thank you, father. The little Loli immediately sat up, and took the spoon from her father's hand. She then scooped up a large spoonful of tofu pudding, and began to eat it with relish. I hope I won't have to kneel down to strange things when I get back. The father looked at the adorable little Loli as she ate, and sighed in resignation. He really didn't know what to do with this little girl. So this is the taste of an ice cream that costs 200 copper coins each. It's completely different from a pancake that costs only 1 copper coin each. So there really is such an indescribable delicacy in this world. If I have the money, I want to eat 10 more pancakes. After finishing all of the eggshells, Kenny looked at the paper bag in his hand with a yearning expression. He looked at the customers in the restaurant and swallowed his saliva. However, he didn't reveal too much envy. Instead, he took out the money pouch from his waist and raised his hand to indicate the bill. It's a total of 200 copper coins. Please check it. Kenny handed the money pouch to Sally with a slightly uneasy expression. There shouldn't be anyone here who would take out so many copper coins to pay the bill. All right. Sally took the money pouch with a natural expression and began to check it. She rummaged through the money pouch a few times and then poured out all of the copper coins into a small pouch. She nodded at Kenny and said, 200 copper coins is just right. All right, thank you. Kenny nodded as he accepted the empty purse. He walked out of the restaurant, and a smile appeared on his face as he said to himself, I'm going to become the best hairdresser in Lace, and the best hairdresser in Chaos City. I'm going to be able to eat here 3 times a day. Kenny clenched his fists and quickly strode toward the barber shop. After breakfast, there were also many customers who ordered ice cream with the intention of trying it out. Then, they were quickly dominated by the sweet and refreshing taste of the ice cream. It was early in the morning, and the ice cream simply couldn't stop. Mr. Mac, I want to buy an ice cream for my son. Can I take it out? Dicus was at the kitchen door, and he turned to Megs was paying the bill. Meg shook his head with a smile, and said, if you're an ice magic caster, then you can consider it. Ice cream melts very quickly at room temperature, so we don't provide takeout service. You can bring him here on your day off, and it'll be even better if it's freshly made. All right, then I'll have to bring him here on my day off. Dicus nodded with a hint of disappointment. He then gave Meg a thumbs up and said, Mr. Mac, your restaurant will definitely become the most popular restaurant in the Aiden Square. You're too kind. Meg smiled. He was starting to become immune to these kinds of compliments. After the morning opening hours, Sally and Yabemia went out to buy clothes together after cleaning up the restaurant. System, the empty space in front of the restaurant is mine now. The mission should be completed, right? Meg pushed open the door and looked at the empty space in front of the restaurant, as well as the tall wall not far away. Amy's was located in the westernmost corner of the Aiden Square. A 5-meter-tall wall separated the Aiden Square from the Bastille prison, and Amy's was right next to the wall. Of course, this was relative. For the sake of aesthetics and lighting, Mammy Restaurant was still close to 20 meters away from the wall. Furthermore, there were 2 rows of trees planted right next to the wall. The intertwining shadows of the trees almost covered the entire wall, so the restaurant didn't feel oppressive at all. As for safety, there was a 10-meter-deep trench in the middle of the 5-meter-tall wall, which was filled with traps. After that, there were 5 more walls, and the Bastille prison was in the middle of the 5 walls. Also, the Bastille prison was divided into 2 sections, the ground section and the underground section. The ground section only held low-level criminals and some minor criminals, while the serious criminals and powerful criminals were all locked up in the underground section. As for how deep the deepest section of the prison was, no one knew except for the warden and the mayor. However, one thing was for sure, and that was that even 10th-tier criminals couldn't escape from the Bastille prison. It was said that there were more than 10 10th-tier criminals in the Bastille prison now. Most of them were war criminals left over from the war among species, and some were important figures who had seriously violated the laws of Chaos City in recent years. The laws of Chaos City hadn't become a joke on the Norland continent, and the most important reason was that the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple had locked up those 10th-tier criminals in the Bastille prison. 15 years ago, the Lord of the Grey Temple, Roland, led the 10 elders of the Grey Temple to hunt down a 10th-tier giant dragon who had committed the massacre of an entire family in Chaos City on the Dragon Island. After that, they were besieged. The City Lord of Chaos City, Michael, mobilized the entire city to the Dragon Island to welcome the return of the Grey Temple along with Principal Novan. The Dragon Island had no choice but to release the Grey Temple in the end due to pressure from all the other races. After that battle, the laws of Chaos City became renowned throughout the Norland continent, and no one dared to ignore them. After that, Chaos City made a rule that all giant dragons below the 9th tier had to take human form in Chaos City. Unless there were special circumstances, They couldn't reveal their true form in Chaos City. Otherwise, they would be banished from the city and denied entry to the city forever. Mag withdrew his gaze from the tall wall. It could be said that all of the current leaders of Chaos City were idealists. Regardless of whether it was the City Lord who was promoting equality, the Palace Lord who was trying to make Chaos City a safer place, or the Principal who was trying to equalize education, all of them were doing things that were completely out of line with this world. However, I have to admit that it's exactly because of these people that Chaos City is so lovely. A smile appeared on Meg's face. Apart from the little forest beside the wall, the marble floor extended 5 to 6 meters toward the wall after reaching Amy's. It was 6 meters wide, so it wouldn't be a problem to set up 4 tables for 4 people. Ding! Congratulations, host, for obtaining the right to use the open-air space. You have fulfilled the requirement of 16 seats. Mission accomplish. Reward, 1 open-air seat renovation. The system's voice sounded. Then just renovate it for me, Meg said in his heart after making sure there was no one around. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.